Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Attacked by the Invisible Villain? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Meetings. Streams of light filtered through the trees above, casting patterns of shadow and light on the ground. Hidden in a bush beneath a tree beside the meandering trail that ran through the woods near his home, Isizuku, a young 4-year-old boy, sat curled up, arms wrapped around his knees. The branches above rustled in the wind, making the patterns of light and shadows dance across the path. As he sniffled, Izuku's eyes listlessly followed them, wishing to disappear, even if only for a little while. Normally, he would have been playing with his friends, but today, he wanted to be alone. His face was scratched and small burns littered his arms. Bakuchan's quirk had manifested itself a little over half a year ago. While Izuku was happy for Bakuchan, since manifesting his quirk, Bakugo had become more and more abrasive toward Izuku, especially as it became more and more apparent that Izuku's quirk was not manifesting. Only a few days before, Izuku's mother had taken him to the doctor to find out what might be wrong with him. They had been able to discover the source of his difference. Izuku was not going to manifest a quirk. He had a double-toe joint. Izuku did not quite understand everything the doctor said, but he understood clearly, nonetheless, that a quirk was not coming. Izuku clutched his legs closer to his body and pressed his face into his knees once more. He did not want to see the world or be seen by it. He did not want to face Bakuchan. After all, with no quirk, what was he? Just a few days before the doctor's visit, Izuku and his friends had walked down the path before him, crossing the log that made a bridge across the small stream. Bakuchan had fallen down, and Izuku had gone to help him. But Izuku was not going to manifest a quirk. So, Bakugo brushed him off, rejecting the offer of help. Izuku sniffled once again. No wonder Bakuchan was so angry. He knew something was wrong with me. He didn't want a quirkless nobody, a Deku, to help him. Izuku curled into himself even more, arms aching from how tightly he clutched his legs. His chest tightened, and his eyes burned. Ever since Bakuchan's quirk manifested, it seemed like he was growing farther and farther away. Now, with Izuku's quirkless diagnosis, the chasm between them felt more like a stormy ocean, unswimmable and deadly. Today, Bakugo had used his quirk to hurt Izuku, all the while calling him useless and quirkless. Izuku sniffled and wiped his eyes with the backs of his hands. I didn't even tell him about the doctor, so he must have figured it out. He already knows. He could tell. I wish Mommy. Flinching, Izuku suppressed a memory, rising unbidden to the forefront of his mind from the night of the doctor's visit, his mother clutching him, sobbing and apologizing as the light from All Might's debut video washed over them. Izuku shuddered, and the leaves rustled. But this time, it was not due to the wind. Unseen, just a few meters away, a shadow watched as Izuku attempted to hold back tears. The shadow crept closer, and the underbrush rustled around it. Izuku continued to ignore the world around him, but when the shadow sat quietly beside him and placed a furry, clawed hand on his arm, Izuku looked up. The two looked at each other for a moment before Izuku's ever-impeccable manners kicked in. Oh, hello. Izuku sniffled a greeting while wiping his eyes once more. Then he gave the creature a half bow, or as much of one as he could manage while still sitting curled up under a bush. The small brown furry creature tilted its head to the side. You can see me? It spoke in a small, squeaky, high-pitched voice and seemed curious. Izuku nodded. What's your quirk? The furry creature again tilted its head, this time to the other side. Quirk? Izuku's face scrunched in confusion. Yes? Yokai do not have human powers, the creature stated quite bluntly. Izuku blinked. Yo-kai. The creature nodded. You and the other small humans pass through here often. We have seen you. Izuku's face scrunched even tighter in confusion. But I thought the teachers said that yokai aren't real. The creature, the yokai, stood, placing its hairy hands on its equally hairy hips. Humans may have forgotten, but that doesn't mean we are not here. Yokai in Japan. Fairies in West. Mere people in oceans. Where do you think stories come from? Yokai have been here for long time. The yokai spoke slowly, eyes wide, as if it stated the obvious. It sounded strange to have someone speak so matter-of-factly with a voice that sounded like a squeaky mouse. But it was the next thing the yokai said that really piqued Izuku's curiosity, his eyes growing almost as wide as the tiny yokai's eyes. The glow baby was not the first with human power. The yokai stated emphatically and then began to mutter, "It is strange humans believe it was too sudden." It turned its attention back to Izuku, whose jaw was slowly dropping. The yokai spoke again. The first kind with power were worshipped, revered, rejected, or feared and ended. Some were onmyoji. Some were called witches, werewolves, or vampires and hunted. It paused momentarily. Humans are strange creatures, very strange indeed. Izuku loosened the hold on his knees as he relaxed, all lighting up his face as the yokai nodded sagely. It must have taken Izuku's expression to be an invitation to continue because continue it did. Humans have always suppressed those who are different. Some onmyoji were feared, but some protected humans from yokai. Never met others with different human powers, like witches, but stories from far away say many were killed. Always treated as strange, no matter revered or rejected. Then human powers went to sleep for a long time. Humans still changed, still grew, but not knowing, until many had power. The creature thought for a moment. Today's humans owe lots to glow baby. It helped make human powers normal. Izuku nodded as he wiped his nose on his arm. You call quirks human powers? The yokai sighed. Human powers have always been human powers, even if they change. So confusing calling human powers different all the time. The yokai tilted its head again. But then, you do not have new type of human power. The yokai paused. A quirk. You are one with old power. The last human who could see me lived over 400 human years ago. Izuku blinked, surprised at this revelation, and the yokai still went on, almost bouncing as it spoke. You do not have new human quirk, but you have, the sight, an old ability. The yokai squeaked excitedly. You can see me. You can touch me. The little yokai held out its hand. Izuku tentatively reached out, taking the hairy, clawed hand in his own, wonder blossoming on his face. The yokai squeaked excitedly again. You are like onmyoji, but it is still yet to be seen if you have more than the sight. And so, Izuku, days after discovering he did not have a quirk, found he had a pre-quirk ability. He could see spirits, the yokai. That night, as Izuku lay in bed, he pondered over his conversation with the tiny yokai. The only question that remained was what it meant for Izuku's dream to become a hero. Kekyu sat in the same bush beneath the same tree as the day before. Izuku crawled inside and plopped down next to the little brown fur ball of a yokai. Good afternoon. Kekyu gave Izuku a toothy grin. Good afternoon to you too. Would you like to hear about the Wanyudo today? Izuku nodded, and Kekyu began another tale as Izuku listened with rapt attention until his mind began to wander, thinking about what these meetings meant to him. Since their first encounter, Izuku and Kekyu had been sitting in the bush, under the tree, just talking about yokai. Kekyu was more than willing to tell him notable stories about yokai's achievements and misdeeds. Today's yokai, the Wanyudo, seemed more apt to misdeeds than achievements. Izuku's mind wandered more as he listened. He had been coming out to meet with the little yokai for over a month now, and it had decided to trust Izuku with its name only the day before. Izuku smiled. Apparently, names were important especially to the yokai. Allowing another person to use one's name was a sign of trust. If you knew someone's real name, you could use their name as a spell, either for or against them. As such, names were the shortest spell one could cast, and thus, for yokai, entrusting another with one's name was rare, if it happened at all. Kekyu's voice squeaked as it grew excited about the next part of the story. Like others before it, this Wanyudo captured innocent souls, not just souls of those who had committed crimes. Izuku's face scrunched at the thought of innocent people being taken away to the afterlife without warning by the Wanyudo. The real world of yokai, not the fables, was fascinating and terrifying. The time spent listening to each of Kekyu's stories not only filled Izuku's afternoons, allowing him to escape the stares and whispers of the other children now that they knew he was quirkless and were avoiding him, but it also amplified Izuku's growing realization that yokai were not to be trifled with, and because Izuku could see, he would need to be very careful about the more malicious yokai. After all, if Kekyu was right, the Wanyudo was another example of why it was best not to associate with some yokai. You should never look into the eye of the Wanyudo, or you will become their next target. Kekyu shook its finger as it spoke. Izuku nodded, propping his head on his chin, and Kekyu rattled on to talk about another Wanyudo. This one apparently would deliberately jump in front of unsuspecting travelers to test whether they could see, and if they could, whisk them away. While yokai were scary, meeting Kekyu made Izuku happy, not only for the companionship and trust, once Kekyu told Izuku its name, but also because Kekyu believed in him. Their conversation the day before, when Kekyu had told Izuku his name, centered around heroes for once rather than yokai. Kekyu saw very little difference between a quirk and being able to see yokai, even though Izuku tried to explain the difference. Furthermore, to the small yokai, it did not matter that no one would believe Izuku about his newfound ability. Izuku could see, and so, he had an ability worthy of fame. An ability Kekyu valued more highly than any quirk. When Izuku said that being able to see yokai would not help him be a hero and that he needed a quirk to be one, Kekyu merely asked, "Why? You can see us, can't you? Quirks are much less useful than being able to see yokai. Being able to see yokai is much older, much stronger." Izuku had initially tried to explain that everyone knew quirks were necessary to help heroes defeat villains. This meant he could not be a hero, even if he could see yokai. How could seeing yokai help Izuku defeat villains? Kekyu had been indignant and looked at Izuku as if he had two heads or one eye. "You have the sight. What more is needed? You are the first with the sight in a very long time. You could lead a parade of 100 yokai and take the top among humans. Loyal yokai will help." Izuku blushed at Kekyu's words, but he doubted that anyone would accept seeing yokai as a quirk. He was also unsure what Kekyu meant by a parade of yokai, but he had a vague feeling that Kekyu was not talking about taking the number 1 spot on the hero ranking, that his and Kekyu's definition of hero might be different. Still, the fact that Kekyu believed he could be a hero with the sight made Izuku feel warm inside. A sudden silence broke Izuku out of his memories. "You listen?" Kekyu asked, eyes wide and wondering. "Yes," Izuku nodded, "but I was also thinking about yesterday." Kekyu tilted its head to the side. Izuku smiled, "Thank you for trusting me." Kekyu's toothy grin spread from one side of its head to the other. "You will be great on Myoji. It is an honor. So, we must talk about how to avoid the Wanyudo." Time passed, and Izuku continued to sit beneath the tree with Kekyu and talk whenever it was possible for them to meet. Today, in the waning heat of early autumn, Izuku was not in a state to talk about yokai. "So, today I saw a story about All Might. He's not in Japan right now, but he is so cool." Kekyu nodded along to Izuku's tale about All Might's fight against a particularly heinous villain who had taken an entire bank hostage. "It's so cool how they use their quirks to help others." Izuku accentuated his words with a poorly formed punch. Kekyu huffed. "I say before, I say again, the sight is far better." Izuku's face scrunched in frustration, but his eyes betrayed his excitement. "Heroes need quirks. That's what everyone says. They use them to fight. I want to be a hero, but..." Kekyu chirped, "The sight can give you strength. Some heroes do not use quirks for fighting. The sight allows you to ask yokai to fight with you. We have talked about many yokai. While many are not good, some can be helpful. With the help of yokai you can be much stronger. But no one would believe me if I said I could see and ask yokai for help." Kekyu huffed, "That may be." The little yokai sat for a moment, obviously thinking. "If you cannot convince humans you have the sight, then you should gather your parade of yokai and have them help you. They can do things and you can say it was a quirk. You do not need to say it was yokai." Izuku jerked, his hair catching in the branches of the bush. "Do you think so?" "Yes." Kekyu jumped up. "Yes. I said before, the sight is much better." Use the sight to lead yokai and take the top. Izuku's brow scrunched up. Kekyu kept saying the same thing. Maybe it was possible if they did not say it was yokai, even if it was, but that would be lying. Izuku stayed silent, and Kekyu watched unblinkingly. Seeing Izuku's indecision, Kekyu nodded sagely. Fight villains with the help of yokai, and if you develop spirit power, like on Myoji, then use it to be hero too. Do you really think I could use, Izuku paused, some sort of spiritual power? That I have that too, not just the ability to see. Kekyu nodded emphatically. At this, Izuku felt tears form in his eyes, and he buried his head on his knees, hiding them with his arms. Maybe, just maybe, he could be a hero. As autumn turned to winter, Izuku still did not know how to pretend the sight was a quirk, as Kekyu suggested. Izuku was not even sure how to go about changing the quirkless diagnosis. All the same, it would take more than just one yokai friend to make it possible, but Izuku only knew Kekyu. So, they agreed he needed more time to gather more friends so that when he did change his quirk status, he could better pretend that he had some semblance of a quirk. Izuku looked around before leaving the path and slipping into a small clearing hidden from the path by the large bush they normally sat in, as he muttered to himself. It's not cheating, is it? I mean, I'll just be lying about what exactly it is. We can pretend it's like my mom's quirk, except the yokai will be doing the moving, not me. While Izuku was desperate to find an answer as to whether he should call the sight a quirk, right now, he was somewhat content to wait. After all, Kekyu believed in him and trusted him not only with its name but told him the day before that it had a surprise for him. As Izuku entered the clearing, a new sight met his eyes. Today, little golf ball-sized tufts of fluff were hopping and tumbling around Kekyu, who stood in the middle of the clearing. Izuku watched in fascination as the little yokai danced around and around. The small round ball of fluff almost blended into their surroundings due to their fluff being a wide range of earthy tones. Some were a deep brown, while others were more like the color of sand, each a unique hue. They had short, spindly legs and arms that were almost as thin as pieces of string and eyeballs almost as big as their bodies. Izuku wondered how they supported their tiny bodies on such thin limbs. As the tufts of fluff continued to dance around Kekyu, it turned to face Izuku, smiling its sharp, toothy grin. These are my underlings, Kekyu crowed proudly. They are like me. Izuku wondered aloud, but they look more like they're covered in fuzz. You have hair, not fuzz? Kekyu started in indignation. What is the difference? We are one of a kind. Izuku chuckled, and Kekyu merely crossed its arms with a half-hearted glower, but its eyes showed amusement. Izuku crouched down, reaching a hand forward. The little fluffy yokai pulled back nervously, but when Izuku flipped his hand palm up, the little yokai stared with their wide, beady eyes for only a moment before clamoring to jump onto his hand. Kekyu's smile widened, and Izuku giggled. The tufts of Fluff's little legs and fuzzy bodies tickled the palm of Izuku's hand. A few can even speak. They could not before, but now they can. Izuku giggled again at the pride in Kekyu's voice. The little fuzz yokai clambering up his arm and onto his shoulder were bumping and bouncing into each other while fighting to keep their place. One was even clambering up the side of Izuku's head. Just like a proud papa or mama, Izuku thought and smiled sadly. Hisashi Midoriya had left just before Izuku was diagnosed quirkless, and it did not seem like the man would return anytime soon. 2 weeks after the diagnosis, Izuku, who had heard his mother's hushed but distressed voice, had decided to hide around a corner and listen to the conversation between the two adults. Apparently, the man had not been available to speak until then. Hisashi's voice was almost louder than his mother's as he yelled on the other end of the receiver when she told him the news. His father was mad that Izuku was quirkless. His mom had cried. At the time, Izuku just slipped back down the hallway, biting back tears of his own, wishing only to meet the furry yokai from the woods. Coming back to the present, Izuku kept a smile plastered on his face as he continued to watch the little fuzz yokai. Izuku looked back up at Kekyu and sighed. He felt content to make friends with the short furball yokai and its little fuzzy underlings. Even though Kekyu stood only about 30 centimeters tall, Kekyu seemed so sure of itself. So knowledgeable. Kekyu was not upset with Izuku's quirkless status and believed in him. For now, what Izuku wanted was to sit with Kekyu and listen to stories from the past about yokai and onmyoji alike until he was ready to venture out and meet more yokai. Determination filled Izuku as he continued to watch fuzzy yokai. He would need more yokai friends, but he would also need to take his time. Kekyu was insistent on that point because yokai were dangerous. So, for now, Izuku decided to try to ignore the shadows of the other yokai he could see that passed by the edges of his vision, even if they made him jump at seemingly nothing. The August sun was blazing, and Izuku and his mother were out shopping. The now 5-year-old Izuku paused as he walked beside his mother down the crowded sidewalk. Off to the side, a green, half-human half-turtle-looking creature lay face down on the cement. Izuku could see steam rising up around the creature and could hear it whining in misery. Izuku pulled at his mother's hand. "Mommy, we have to help the turtle thing." Inko Midoriya smiled down at her son. "Oh, you see a turtle? Where is it?" Izuku pointed toward the creature, and Inko's expression became puzzled. Izuku was pointing to an empty space on the sidewalk. "I'm sorry, sweetie, I don't see it. Can you show me where it is?" Izuku hesitated for a moment. The turtle creature was easy to spot from where they were standing, and suddenly remembering Kekyu, Izuku shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mama, it crawled away." Shame for lying bit Izuku's conscience, but if the creature was a yokai, then she would not be able to see it. So, Izuku decided it was up to him to help it. He would have to ask Kekyu about the yokai later. In the time that he had known Kekyu, he vaguely remembered it describing a yokai that looked similar to the one on the sidewalk, but they had talked about so many different things he could not be sure. Izuku desperately wanted to help, even if it was not a nice yokai. However, Kekyu was very adamant that the yokai were strong even when vulnerable, and what humans thought of as helping was not always considered kindness to the yokai. Izuku glanced over his shoulder at the yokai as he and his mother continued on their way, face sullen and etched with worry. Once their shopping was done, Izuku scrambled off to the woods and found Kekyu under the bush once more. "I saw something but Mom couldn't see it." Kekyu turned to Izuku and titled its head. Izuku bit his lip. There was a turtle thing with a flat head. It was on the ground. Kekyu squeaked. "The Kappa. They live in the water and like cucumbers." Always remember, respect is very important to the Kappa, but they are still dangerous and mysterious. They will always bow if you bow first. Then, it will lose the water in the bowl on its head if it bows too far. It is a good way to escape if it tries to eat you. Did it have water in the bowl on its head? Izuku thought long and hard but then shook his head. It will lose strength and be paralyzed if it does not have water in the bowl when on land. But if you help it and fill it, the Kappa will be your servant. Izuku's face scrunched up. "I don't want a servant. My underlings are tiny, powerless yokai. For the strong yokai, you must know how to talk and act with them. You must be strong. Yokai are tricky." Izuku flinched, and Kekyu continued. "Kappa drown humans and animals to eat them. I can tell you about each yokai you meet. Each loyal yokai will help you become great. The yokai like the great. The strong." Kekyu, excited that Izuku finally came to ask it about another yokai, especially one who was liable to become a follower due to the circumstance, continued enthusiastically with a slightly altered approach. "Since humans want you to have quirk to be hero, then take charge and have many yokai allies. Kappas are tricky. They must have water on their head to survive on land. It could die without it. If a Kappa loses the water in the dish, then fill it. They will be loyal to you. If you refill this Kappa's bowl, it will honor your help, especially since it lost its strength on its own. They like cucumbers too. If you ever run into a Kappa, give it one, and it won't eat you." Kekyu nodded, and Izuku pursed his lips. Kekyu leaned forward, deciding to give another push. Kappa were the yokai it knew the most about, after. Kappa's no medicine. Good for a hero, any? Stories say they taught humans how to set bones. Make it a follower. They also know how to wrestle. It could train you in exchange for a cucumber. Then you will be able to fight villains. Izuku scrunched his face. He did not want to make the Kappa his follower. How would that be any different from the villains on the All Might show who used others' weaknesses to make them do what they wanted? Izuku took a deep breath to protest but stopped when Kekyu spoke again. That Sparky child has followers. They follow him because he is strong, even if not nice. Izuku looked at Kekyu again, meeting the little yokai's eyes. It was true. The other children followed Bakugo-chan. Izuku nodded, even if he was still unsure about what he thought and what he wanted to do. At the very least, he could help the Kappa and make sure it was not hurt. Making his decision, Izuku nodded, scrambling away as Kekyu called encouragement from behind. Izuku ran down the path once more, trying to go as quickly as his little legs would carry him. It had been a long time since he had first seen the Kappa. After all, it was only after he and his mom had finished shopping that he had gone to see Kekyu. As soon as Izuku returned home, he snuck into the kitchen and grabbed a water bottle from the fridge. Turning it over in his hands, Izuku second-guessed himself. Should I? If helping will make it follow me, is that okay? I don't want to force it, but Kekyu says it might die if I don't, if it can be a helpful friend. Izuku scrunched his face as he thought. Then, lips pursed and eyes lit with determination, Izuku scrambled out the door, the water bottle clutched in his tiny hands as he made his way toward the market. While Izuku wanted to be strong and brave like Bakugo-chan, he did not want to be mean like Bakugo-chan. Even Izuku admired Bakugo-chan's strength and determination. If he could be that for the yokai but also be kind, he could be a good hero. Izuku dodged the adults still milling the streets as he made his way toward the shopping strip where he first saw the Kappa. Izuku jerked to a stop as he approached, eyes wide. The Kappa was still there, looking somewhat shriveled. Izuku gasped in shock at the now wrinkly yokai. People were stepping around the area as if they knew it was there, even though they could not see it. Izuku rushed forward, pushing through the legs of the adults, and came to a stop by the Kappa's head. Hands fumbling, Izuku twisted the top off the bottle of water and poured it over the creature, paying particular attention to filling the tiny bowl-like indent on top of its head. Within moments, the Kappa's head popped up, and it looked around. It looked far less wrinkly, and its eyes were wide but focused. Izuku smiled. Behind him, people continued to pass by, most without paying any attention to the child squatting on the sidewalk, empty water bottle in hand and a puddle of water in front of him. A few looked askance but continued on their way. Are you okay? Izuku half-whispered to the greenish being, now squatting on the sidewalk in front of him. The Kappa blinked up at Izuku, dazed and somewhat surprised that the human child was speaking to it. Ku. Izuku stopped himself. Kekyu had explained the serious nature of names for yokai and that it was rude to tell someone else another's name. My yokai friend said that if you didn't have water, you'd be hurt, so I gave you some. The Kappa continued to blink. Do you want to be friends? At Izuku's words, the Kappa tilted its head to the side, and the water sloshed precariously. Izuku's head jerked up and the Kappa froze, sitting still as the water settled in the cup-like indent on its head once more. You need the water, Izuku nodded sagely. The Kappa also nodded, then slowly stood. Izuku popped up, standing beside the Kappa, who was now taller than him. Izuku giggled as the Kappa continued to stare. It tilted its head to one side again, not enough to disturb the water, and then it turned around with only a backward glance at Izuku. Izuku smiled, taking the glance as an invitation to follow, and jogged to keep up with the Kappa as it walked on long, gangly legs down a narrow alley. As they maneuvered their way through the streets, Izuku began to wonder where the Kappa was going. It did not look back, and it did not indicate in any way that Izuku should stop following. As they approached a shallow riverbank, Izuku's steps began to become more tentative. As the Kappa continued forward, Izuku slowed more, not coming too close to the water. Kekyu's words about Kappa drowning victims ran through his head. But we're friends now, right? The Kappa won't hurt me, right? I don't want to follow her, but I did help. Izuku stopped, and the Kappa dove into the water. In a moment, it surfaced and turned to face Izuku. The Kappa bowed and Izuku bowed back. Then, the Kappa dove beneath the surface of the water. Turning on his heel, Izuku darted off to talk to Kekyu once more. The next day, Inko jerked to a halt after she opened the door to leave for work, Izuku by her side so she could drop him off at the daycare. She stared for a moment at the fish lying on the mat outside their apartment door. Izuku, on the other hand, squealed happily and dove to pick up the fish. Inko started at the noise, reaching for Izuku in an attempt to stop him from picking up the fish. "Izuku, you don't know where that's been or who left it there," Inko exclaimed while trying to catch Izuku. Izuku pouted while holding the fish with both hands in front of him. "Mama, it's from the Kappa." Inko gaped at Izuku but sighed, shaking her head. "A new game?" As Inko continued to watch Izuku ecstatically fawn over the fish, she smiled sadly. "Well, maybe it'll distract him from not having a quirk and being able to be a hero." In less than a minute, the fish made its way into the fridge, and Inko nearly forgot about it, until the next day. The next morning, they found another fish on the mat outside their door, and they found one there again every day thereafter. The classroom was quiet. Each chair was tucked neatly under its respective desk. 2 people stood by the door while unseen little yokai hid under desks, behind the podium, and just outside the door, sniggering, shoving each other, and delightfully watching the confrontation. The teacher looked down at Izuku, arms crossed and disdain clearly evident in his glare. Izuku sighed. There was nothing he could do to make the teacher or his fellow classmates like him. If daycare and kindergarten had been hard without a quirk, first grade was worse. Now, not only were his classmates increasingly distant, but even the teachers either sidestepped him, like he was made of glass, or they deliberately picked him out from the rest of the class. Most of the teachers and students avoided Izuku, but Takai-sensei was one of the exceptions. While he ignored Izuku on most days, he would still, more often than less, single him out during or after class. Takai-sensei began tapping a steady staccato with his forefinger against his crossed arms. "Well, care to explain?" Izuku bit his lip. Now that they were in the middle of the school year, he knew telling the truth would only make Takai-sensei angry. "I studied for a really long time. I'm sorry I couldn't do better." Takai-sensei held out their latest reading quiz, a big red 50% inked at the top of the page. "You honestly think I'd believe that you studied?" Izuku inwardly flinched but outwardly tried to remain calm. Looking guilty would only encourage Takai-sensei to suspect him further. He knew that from experience. "You've been a problem student since school started in April, and you're only in first grade. You shouldn't be exhibiting these issues already." Izuku flinched, and Takai-sensei frowned. "Whether you studied or not, you shouldn't resort to cheating when you're struggling, especially since it's a simple kanji test." Takai-sensei pointed to an answer that was clearly correct. Izuku remembered studying it, but it was marked wrong. Izuku stiffened but did not flinch this time. The sniggering of the yokai grew louder. "I didn't cheat." Izuku tried to stand tall, his heart fluttering and his stomach churning. Takai-sensei shook his head. "Don't lie, Midoriya-kun. I'll be watching you in the future, and I'd better not catch you again. Don't use your status as an excuse to do the wrong thing." Izuku flinched, grimacing when the teacher mentioned his quirkless status but, otherwise, did not respond. Takai-sensei gestured for Izuku to go, and so Izuku left. He ignored the still snickering yokai as he slipped out of the room and, when the door closed, gave his best imitation of Kekyu's proud and aloof glare to the yokai in the hallway. Izuku whispered, punctuating every word, "Leave. Alone." The little yokai scoffed but dispersed, shaking their fists as they went. Izuku sighed, clenching his fist, his face troubled. Initially, he did not think that the yokai would listen, but the more confidently he spoke, the more likely the little yokai were to leave him alone. It surprised him at first, but Kekyu merely attributed it to the fact that Izuku had potential and that the yokai in an elementary school were weak and inconsequential. Izuku took a deep breath. Speaking so forcefully was not in his nature, but when it came to the yokai, he knew now more than ever that he could not give an inch, at least for the tricksters and the mean ones. Izuku navigated his way through the hall and toward the front entrance. As he stepped outside, the cool autumn air washed over him, and for a second he could relax. But a snide and cutting voice assaulted him. Izuku's head whipped to the side only to see a thin, dark-haired boy leaning against the side of the building. "Jiro-san." Izuku stiffened. The boy was a 4th grader who liked to pick on the younger children. Even now, Izuku could see the small yokai gathering at his heels, and a few were hovering around his head. They were grinning as they eyed the two greedily. Some called out encouragement, egging Jiro-san on, just like they did whenever anyone was being bullied. Get him. He can't do anything to you. Show him his place. Izuku bit his lip. It was always so much harder to deal with the yokai when they hid behind the other students. The small trickster yokai who populated the school fed on the cruelty of the children with baleful glee. They enjoyed students belittling others and always followed the bullies around the school, waiting. When Izuku was alone, he could generally intimidate them, at least enough to make them back off like the ones in the hall upstairs, but it was when they attached themselves to the students that the trouble began. I heard you talking to yourself just a moment ago. Were you blowing off steam since you got caught cheating on your test? Jiro-san snorted. How lame. Everyone's talking about how you always seem to be looking at or talking about things that aren't there. I guess it was true. The yokai cackled. Izuku swallowed and turned to walk away, but Jiro-san followed. I also heard that Bakugo kid calls you a Deku. He do that twice your week? Well, he's an arrogant punk with that flashy quirk, but you... Izuku picked up the pace. Jiro-san stopped following, much to the chagrin of the yokai, but he still called out, scoffing, You're not a Deku, you're just a quirkless, and that's all you'll ever be. Izuku ran. Once he was far enough away, Izuku slowed down, breathing heavily. He rubbed the wetness from his eyes with the backs of his hands. See, it was only recently that he had been able to truly speak with conviction, as per Kekyu's suggestion, when dealing with the yokai. Kekyu had even stopped telling stories, all so that Izuku could practice being assertive enough to intimidate them, but it never seemed to be enough. They backed off when it was only the yokai, but when they hid behind people like Jiro and Bakugo, he could not muster the courage to be assertive, to stand up for himself. All he did was curl in on himself or run away. It made the yokai, who were intimidated when they were alone, gleeful. They relished in it. It was the time that they could win. CRP, Izuku half sobbed, half shouted. Izuku took a shuddering breath and huffed. The only good thing is that they don't care about me being quirkless, except when it comes to the human bullies. Izuku scrubbed at the sides of his head in frustration. What should I do? I'm pushing back like Kekyu said. I'm being strong, but Jiro saw me. Everyone already thinks I'm weird, 'cause they've seen. If I could only figure out how to make at least one of them leave me alone, the yokai or the bullies. His shoulders drooped as he continued to walk toward home, but when he looked around, he noticed that he had reached the river bank. Ever since starting school, Izuku took this path when walking home so that he could see Jinro, the Kappa he had saved. Izuku smiled when he saw Jinro wadding in the reeds, just like he did every day as he waited for Izuku. Jinro perked up as soon as he saw Izuku coming. Izuku smiled fondly as the Kappa paddled to the side of the bank and knelt there, just like he did every day. The sight of someone who was so happy to see him was a blessing. Izuku dug into his backpack and pulled out his bento box, from which he extracted a cucumber and tossed it to the waiting yokai. Jinro leaped to catch the offering, a toothy smile spreading across his face. Izuku giggled as Jinro stuffed the cucumber in his mouth, munching on the treat happily. Today, Jinro's enthusiasm helped Izuku forget Takai-sensei's accusations, even if just a little bit. Izuku was about to continue on his way like he did every other time, but then he slowed. Izuku turned to face the Kappa, a thought rising to the front of his mind, something Kekyu had said when he was debating about whether to save the Kappa or not. Since their first meeting, Jinro had silently given Izuku pointers on how to take care of minor injuries. It was particularly helpful as Izuku did not want his mother to know about the bullying, but if Jinro was willing to help when Izuku showed up with scrapes and bruises, then maybe he would help with more. Hey! Izuku called out. Jinro looked up, eyes curious, as he continued to chew on the treat. If I bring an extra cucumber, would you teach me how to wrestle? How to defend myself? Jinro pondered the question for a minute, eyes drilling into Izuku. Hi. Go to home beach. We meet tomorrow. Izuku beamed. Thanks. He waved and ran off. Jinro watched Izuku out of the corner of his eye as he continued to munch on his treat. Jinro had been at the bottom of the clan under a not-so-powerful Suko for a long time. Suko were another type of water yokai and one stronger than the Kappa. They were also far more cruel and dangerous than the Kappa. This particular Suko's lowly place compared to other Suko displeased it. So, the Suko was particularly cruel when venting its frustration. Jinro's lowly status had been the reason why he was sent out on that swelteringly hot day just over 2 years before and had almost shriveled up on an unusually hard human pathway. After being saved by the small human, Jinro became curious, and finding the human's home, began to leave gifts as thanks for saving his life. Unfortunately, Jinro's situation in the clan did not improve, and he found himself outside the water to do tasks for the others more frequently. It also meant that he had run into the little human on more than one occasion. A good thing for Jinro, given that he was particularly clumsy on land compared to the other Kappa, which they and the Suko found funny. Now though Jinro had left, after being saved by the tiny human more than once, he had slipped away, mostly unnoticed since no one cared. However, a few Kappa did since it meant that they were now the errand runners. To Jinro, the decision was simple. After all, Izuku was going to be a powerful human, and Izuku had saved him from shriveling up on the sidewalk. He had his honor as a Kappa to keep. Jinro understood that Izuku was small now, but he did not care. Izuku was a fast learner and was always willing to give him a cucumber in exchange for lessons and pointers about first aid, even though Jinro already owed Izuku his life and would do so without the cucumber. Jinro was quite indebted to Izuku. It was not long after Jinro left his former clan that he showed the small human his new home one cold afternoon. However, he liked meeting Izuku as he made his way home from the place called school. So, Jinro always ventured down the river to ensure they crossed paths. The cucumbers were always delicious. Jinro finished munching on the treat, smacking his lips greedily as his thoughts turned. It had been almost frustrating when Jinro realized that Izuku already had a familiar. He had met the little brown furball yokai that stood next to Izuku. Yet, even if Jinro was not the first, at least he was the second in Izuku's entourage. It was far better than being the last. Jinro nodded to himself. He could teach the little Izuku how to be great. It was something only he could do. As Izuku left the waterway behind and continued to trot toward home, he came to one of the street crossings, where something unusual was happening. In the middle of the road, 2 tall ox and boar-looking humanoids stood clutching each other as cars whizzed by. Both were bellowing, and no one seemed to be paying them any attention. Izuku only then realized that they were yokai and their appearance was not due to their quirks, meaning no one else could see them. Izuku had only just stopped himself from asking when a hero would show up to help before he grasped the situation. Izuku's large, round eyes turned to watch the 2 yokai standing in the middle of the crosswalk. Maybe they tried to cross with the other people and didn't finish in time. When the traffic stopped, the 2 yokai were still huddled together in fear. Just because they could not be seen did not necessarily mean they could not be hurt by objects made by humans. It was why some of the bigger yokai lived far away from cities. Once the pedestrian light turned on, Izuku rushed toward them, raising both hands to tug on their yuka. "Come with me." The ox and boar yokai looked down at Izuku, surprise written all over their faces. Izuku tugged at them again, more urgently this time. "We have to go." After a quick glance at each other, the 2 took Izuku's tiny hands and allowed him to tug them along as they shakily looked around at the humans passing by. The first time they tried to cross the road, the humans were all in a rush, just like now, bumping into them and jostling them. The boar yokai had tripped, and when the ox yokai had turned to help his friend, the humans had finished crossing, and then the horrid metal carriages started moving again, surrounding them. Now, one tiny human was leading them across the road. Most of the adults ignored the child, who seemed to be raising his hands into thin air. After all, this is what it looked like to the humans, but a few whispered, "Creepy kid." Izuku flinched but did not let go of the ox and boar yokai's hands as one adult quickly passed, glaring at Izuku. Izuku worried his lip, and the 2 yokai tightened their grip reassuringly as they finished crossing the street. Izuku smiled up at the 2 yokai, who, after bowing, turned and slowly trotted off. Izuku watched sadly as they left, sighed, and then continued on his way home. The next morning, in addition to a fish, several berries, colorful leaves and acorns were left on the front mat. The next day, they were back to only a fish. Izuku smiled sadly as he realized that the two yokai would not be staying, but at least he was able to help them after his own bad day at school. Izuku sat, legs in the lotus pose, while concentrating on his breathing. Ever since asking Jinro to teach him how to defend himself, this was how he and Jinro always started their lessons. Izuku concentrated, or he concentrated as well as a hyperactive first grader was capable of. At the very least, Izuku also had a hyper-focused mode, the same one he channeled when he did his hero analysis for the future. The first notebook was almost done, and as a result, it had taken a few moments to focus on the training after his enthusiastic diatribe about his most recent analysis. Much to his disappointment, Kekyu and Jinro only nodded and then focused back on the training. Izuku then quickly centered his thoughts as he knew the training was also for his future as a hero. Time passed, and Izuku focused only on his breathing until it seemed like the world came to a halt. For the first time since their training began, he found his center. At that moment, it felt like all of his senses were alight. His breathing slowed, and with eyes still closed, he could hear the sound of the wind rustling in the grass, the flow of water over rocks in the nearby stream, the steady flow of traffic from the nearby road, the murmur of people walking the streets. Normally Izuku would not be able to hear all of it. Normally, it would all blend together, but right now, everything was crystal clear, and he was able to focus on all of it simultaneously. He could feel the air moving around him. He could also feel something like heat coming from the direction in which Kekyu was sitting a few meters away and a cool, refreshing wave from where he knew Jinro was sitting. This hyper-aware state was much different from his usual hyper-focused mode. One allowed him to focus every sense on one thing. This new one allowed him to be aware of everything at once. The sudden bark of a dog caused Izuku's eyes to jolt open, and for a moment, everything was glaringly clear. The sky's vibrant blue shimmering, the clouds moving and shifting, the trees swaying in the breeze, each individual blade of grass, and the fluttering of a butterfly's wings were all in sharp focus. Izuku took steadying breaths, eyes nearly popping out of his head in wonder at the sensory overload that began to steady itself within moments of the dizzying experience. Kekyu crowed excitedly, "You touched upon your spirit energy." Jinro nodded, "Aura needs focus." "Focus good. Strengthen focus." Jinro stood, beckoning for Izuku to do the same. "Follow. Do same. Breathe like before. Do same." Kekyu jumped up. "Now we learn to fight?" Jinro paused and nodded. "First learn stance. Do same." Jinro then stepped firmly into a defensive position, tightening his core and flexing his arms to defend his core and head. "Follow. Do same." Izuku nodded, copying the stance to the best of his ability. Jinro pursed his lips and shook his head, performing the move again. Feet, core, arms, stronger. Breathe. For the next hour, Jinro had him do the same stance again and again until Izuku did it to his liking, all the while calling out various words in an attempt to help Izuku. Stronger. Stamp. Stamp like shake earth. Body like mountain. Arms like swim upstream. Izuku struggled to perform the stance while simultaneously breathing the way Jinro wanted, but he was getting there, slowly but surely. Izuku followed Jinro's instructions meeting after meeting, and as time passed, he learned more and more stances. Jinro, although not as intelligent as other yokai and not the smartest Kappa, was not the least either. He knew humans were not as strong as yokai and vaguely knew that Izuku was very young and would need more time to build up his strength. Yokai, like the Kappa, were strong by nature, but humans had to work for it. As Izuku continued to perfect the stances and even began to string them together, it became painfully obvious that Izuku needed more of something, but Jinro did not know what. Lessons came and went, and Izuku made progress slowly. And so, time passed. A year after their first training session, Izuku was able to MSTR and quickly switch between any stance, but he did not have the necessary strength to use them effectively. While he had the endurance to follow through with the stances for an afternoon, he had none beyond that. The stances themselves helped with strength, just by the power put behind them, but it was not nearly enough. Jinro pouted. After so long, It was strange that the little human was still so weak and lacked the overall strength needed. Izuku watched Jinro watching him, feeling strange and a bit upset that he could not quite meet Jinro's expectations after so much time. It felt like he could not build the necessary strength quickly enough. It was not like he had a strength quirk, and the Kappa was strong. Jinro and Izuku had just gone through a light sparring session, but Jinro had quickly pulled back, afraid to hurt Izuku. Izuku rubbed his smarting side, where he was sure to have a series of bruises by the next day. Unfortunately, they would only add to the bruises from earlier that day when one of his classmates had pushed him down in the hallway. Too young to fight. Human hurt easy. Jinro wailed as Izuku tried to placate the distressed yokai. Izuku is weak, Kekyu stated flatly. Izuku pouted and glared at the furry yokai. Kekyu, who ignored Izuku, perked up with a sudden realization and spoke. Other humans go to gym or go for run. Even those who go to martial sensei do other training. Izuku perked up. You need more muscle, Kekyu nodded bluntly. I don't have a strength quirk. Other humans without strength quirk have strength. Sparky Boy often goes on morning run. He say it is for training. You do same. Just like you watch quirks and learn how humans grow stronger. Izuku blinked, surprised. While he had continued his analysis and was now starting his third notebook, he had not thought about training his body beyond learning stances and meditation from Jinro. Izuku turned to the Kappa, Jinro-sensei. Jinro blushed, still unused to his Izukudano, referring to him as such. May I shorten our lessons to work on building up my strength? If I do, I can begin to spar with you and start more advanced lessons. I'll do strength training for at least a year, maybe a little longer, until the end of 3rd grade, and then we can see about sparring again. Until then, may we continue our training as it is now? Meditation and practicing stances? Jinro nodded enthusiastically. He did not want to hurt Izuku ever. So, he was anxious about sparring again. It would give him time to prepare, and for now, they could do what they were both comfortable with. Izuku nodded back. I'll be back again tomorrow. Kekyu and Jinro waved as Izuku sped off. Once he reached home, Izuku burst into the house. Inko was in the kitchen. Hurriedly, Izuku bounced behind her. Mom, before dinner, can I go online? I have something I want to look up. It won't take long. Can I, Mom? Inko smiled. Sure, sweetie. Izuku sped off and, swinging into the chair, turned on the computer and quickly navigated the browser, pulling up multiple sites on strength training and cross-referencing everything he found. At dinner, Izuku glanced at his mother, who was sitting across from him. Mom. Yes, Izuku? Well, I've been looking into how to, train. Inko flinched. I just want to do something, Izuku cut in quickly. Inko bit her lip, worry etched on her face. She was hoping that Izuku had put aside his dream of being a hero. The world said you needed a quirk to fight villains, and even with the help of a quirk, it was dangerous. Inko searched Izuku's face, which was slowly losing its shine as she stayed silent. I don't want you to get hurt, Izuku dear. Izuku quickly interjected, I need to be able to at least run away. If I'm not fit, have the endurance to run and some training, I can't protect myself. People would train in martial arts all the time before quirks and even now. It will give me an edge, and although people can use their quirk to defend themselves without a license, you can't fight anyway. This is something even I can do. It's still dangerous, Izuku. I just want to have a healthy diet and some weight training. I've done the research on health and fitness websites. I won't even ask for you to pay for a dojo membership or karate class. Izuku smiled inwardly. I have Jinro after all. Please, this is all I want. I just need some help making sure I'm fit and toning my muscles. It's all a part of a healthy lifestyle. Inko took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Fine, but I have to verify all of the information and fact-check the menu. Also, we are not buying heavy weights, just light ones for toning. You're too young to be doing any extensive weight training anyway. Too much can hinder your growth, and I don't really feel comfortable with you doing it anyway. Now, it was Izuku's turn to bite his lip. Inko sighed. You're only in 2nd grade, Izuku. Wait until you're a bit older to do any major strength training. The website said. I don't care what it said about weight training. You are not doing any heavyweight training. Only toning. Izuku sighed and nodded. We can work through this together, Izuku. I'll be with you all the way so you can be as fit and healthy as you like, baby. We can work on it tonight. Izuku perked up. Really? Inko stood, picking up the empty plates. Yes, honey. Let's begin looking at healthy diets and how to best begin toning. You'll want to build a good foundation if you want to do strength training once you're older. Izuku beamed, and Inko smiled to hide the worry. Izuku trudged out of the school building. Today, it felt like nothing had gone right. While the home exercises and training with Jinro at the riverside all seemed to be going well, once again, Bakugo had gotten the better of him, leaving burns up and down Izuku's arms and scorch marks on his clothing. Izuku sighed, listlessly fiddling with the hem of his sleeve where one of Bakugo's small explosions had burned a hole in the fabric. He would have to fix that. What was worse, the burns on his arms itched. Izuku clenched his fist and mumbled, I'll have to stop by the river to see Jinro. I'll need his aloe if I'm going to soothe these before going home. If Mom sees them, she'll worry. Izuku shook himself, trying to stay positive. That morning, Bakugo had knocked him over with a small blast. Using his training, though, Izuku had quickly rolled over and, after hopping up, sidestepped Bakugo, slipping into the crowd and disappearing so he could get to class. Unfortunately, after that one success, his day slowly unraveled. When he finally made it to the classroom, the teacher scolded him for his dirty and rumpled appearance. When Izuku tried to explain, she immediately gave him a detention slip for talking back. Then she ordered Izuku back to his seat. Izuku had slipped into his desk and sat stiffly. Throughout the entire exchange, his classmates and the yokai laughed. Later, during the lunch break, Bakugo found him. Izuku was unable to escape that time. To top it off, Bakugo was livid that Izuku had just disappeared that morning, making the encounter that much worse. And after the long day, it was time for the detention, which was never fun. Especially when you were being punished for something beyond your control and the teacher thought a good, long lecture on not attracting violence was acceptable. Now that the detention was over and Izuku was free, he only wanted to go home and sleep. He did not mind visiting Jinro, but it was one more thing to do, and another reminder of the bad day. Sighing again, Izuku looked up to see that the sky was painted with bright orange and pink hues as the sun touched the horizon. Then, something unexpected happened. About halfway through the yard, a shadow blocked Izuku's path. Izuku's head swiveled to see what it was, only to find a yokai standing only a few feet from where he stood. The yokai was one Izuku had seen before. It was thin and a few centimeters taller than Izuku. Long claws tipped the ends of its long fingers on equally long, spindly arms. It was not a particularly powerful yokai, but it was one of the strongest in the school. The other yokai generally gave it a large berth. Izuku clenched his jaw and glared. The yokai quailed for a moment, shivering as it felt the intensity of Izuku's glare, something that had sharpened since the start of elementary school and all the yokai had noticed. The change had become particularly noticeable over the last few months. Something was growing inside the child, even if it was still weak and underdeveloped, it was there. The yokai reached out its clawed hand, which Izuku batted away. "Leave me alone," Izuku growled. Izuku was done. Even if his meetings with Jinro had been less frequent over the last months due to the training he was doing with his mom, he was well aware he was making progress. It was much easier now than before to reach the hyper-aware state where his senses sharpened exponentially. While he had yet to use the hyper-focus state at school, it made his base ability to intimidate the yokai with his words easier. It also had an added bonus. He was better able to sense the yokai's aura if he focused. It was this very progress that let Izuku know, for a fact, that this yokai was one of the strongest. Today, though, Izuku was not having it. He did not feel like having to intimidate a yokai just to leave the school. He, by all rights, should have been home long ago. But the yokai did not move. Izuku looked around and saw that no one was left on the school grounds. So, he focused his senses and, touching on the first stages of his hyper-aware state, began to funnel all of his energy and all of his will into his voice, into the words that he was about to speak. He could not command his peers, they'd just laugh at the quirkless nobody. He could not command his teachers. Regardless of quirk status, he'd just get another detention. But he could, at the very least, try to command the yokai to leave him alone. If power and strength were the most important things to yokai, he would have to establish himself now. He could not just speak with conviction to try and intimidate them. He needed to use his spiritual energy. The very thing he was developing for the purpose of defending himself. It needed to be his weapon, just like it was for the yokai. Izuku spoke once again, feeling the flow of energy seep into his very words, "Leave." The yokai stepped back in shock but quickly regained its bearing, eyes narrowing when it realized it had backed off from a mere human. Tensing, the yokai prepared to spring, and Izuku's eyes narrowed more in response, only provoking the yokai further. Izuku recognized what the yokai was about to do and willed himself to be calm. Unbidden, the memory from that morning flashed across his vision again, but only for a moment. He would not be pushed around by the yokai on top of the detention caused by Bakugo's bullying. Forget it. Don't let yourself be distracted. Don't let the yokai know you're upset. Funnel the energy behind the emotion into your body, just like during training. Izuku faced the yokai, feet planted solidly, just like he did during his training with Jinro. He had practiced the stances for long enough now that it was a natural move. He set his shoulders back, arms in a defensive position, and his chin up to look the yokai in the eyes. The yokai reached for Izuku again, and Izuku sidestepped it, swinging one leg in a graceful arch while keeping the other planted in place. The yokai stumbled past, not expecting Izuku to be so fast on his feet. It spun around, hackles rising. Izuku watched, gauging it, and in that moment, another image flashed in Izuku's mind, one of his analyses of a hero going hand-to-hand with a villain and the overshoulder throw the hero had performed. Jinro's lessons had also involved practicing throwing a weighted straw dummy since throws were a good way to unbalance opponents, and then escape if need be. Izuku tensed as his mind played over the technique, and as Izuku's attention wavered from the present, the yokai snarled in fury and lunged. Izuku took the opportunity, grabbed the yokai's thin arm, twisted around, and, using the throwing technique, tossed the yokai over his shoulder. The lanky yokai blinked in surprise at finding itself on its back, on the ground, and a defiant Izuku standing over it. Izuku hid his grimace as an image of Bakugo flashed in his mind. Brushing it to the side, he placed his foot firmly on the yokai's chest. "Stay." Izuku once again focused all of his energy and will into that one word. Izuku commanded it. He imagined his words becoming weighty, tangible chains to keep the yokai from getting up and attacking him again. The yokai froze, eyes going wide before it grimaced and nodded. Izuku stepped back lightly, putting distance between them but never turning his back on the yokai. Izuku was not strong enough to leave first. The yokai would have to be the first to walk away to signify its defeat. Only the truly powerful could turn their back and stalk away while the other cowered. Izuku grimaced again. He did not like it. It did not feel right to use power and might to push others down, even if they were yokai. But he could think of nothing else. Today really was a very bad, no good day. With some space between them, Izuku once again stood firm, and the lanky yokai picked itself up, still growling. "Leave. Alone." Izuku commanded. The lanky yokai sniffed but did not attack and stalked off without a second glance. Keeping the yokai in his peripheral vision, Izuku finally slipped out the school gates. It felt more like a draw than a victory. Like two equally matched opponents had sparred, but where the victor could change at any time. At school the next day, the little yokai skittered around Izuku even more than before, and as days passed, Izuku noticed less overt and more subtle goading from the yokai. The match with the yokai in the schoolyard apparently had some effect. According to the yokai, evenly matching with one of the more powerful yoki that proliferated the school meant that the smaller ones avoided Izuku altogether when he was alone. It was as if they were afraid that he would no longer only tell them to leave him alone but that he might fight them just like he had fought the other yokai. When he was not alone, they still hid behind the bullies, but this was also different. Before, the yokai would continue to goad the bullies as they pushed Izuku around, but now they only goaded bullies into starting with Izuku, and then they would flee. Unfortunately, when the bullies focused on the other kids, they went back to their usual tricks. Izuku knew he had made a step forward, but it bothered him that the yokai were still causing others so much trouble. Kekyu, as always, had a theory as to why they avoided direct confrontations with Izuku. Since Izuku could touch yokai due to his spiritual power, which was growing in strength, if he performed the same move on the smaller yokai that he did on the lanky yokai during his fight, they would most likely be severely injured. After all, if Jinro threw Izuku with all his strength, he could kill the boy, which was why Jinro was always careful. Since Izuku did not know how to control his power yet, just like Jinro could injure Izuku, Izuku would most likely injure or even completely defeat the weakest of the yokai. The small yokai knew he was stronger than them, so they resigned themselves to pettiness. Izuku sat in the lotus pose and tried to settle his breathing, but the thought of the yokai at school still plagued him. Earlier that day, he witnessed one of the yokai taunting a younger student, who was then teased by one of their classmates, using the same words as the yokai. Izuku tried to intervene, but being the quirkless kid, did not help. Opening his eyes, Izuku studied Jinro and Kekyu for a moment. It did not take long for the two to turn their attention to him. Jinro tilted his head to the side, and Kekyu eyed Izuku cautiously. Izuku began slowly, "The yokai at school are still avoiding me." Jinro nodded and Kekyu puffed its chest proudly. "Yes, ignore them. They no longer matter," Kekyu nodded curtly. Izuku's chest twisted. He hated being ignored. Guessing Izuku's thoughts, Kekyu huffed, "Yokai do not seek out relationships like humans do. They care for tricks and cruelty. They do not care if you ignore them. They will just focus on others." "Yeah, but while they don't bother me as much anymore, it's not like they're completely avoiding me, and they're still as bad as ever when they harass the other kids." Izuku's voice trailed off. Kekyu looked confused. "Why does that matter?" Izuku blinked, surprised, but quickly shook his head. "That's right. Kekyu is a yokai too." Izuku sighed. "I know you both care about me, but I also want to be a hero. Heroes don't ignore people who are in trouble." He looked pleadingly at the two yokai. "Isn't there something I could do?" Neither spoke, and Izuku clenched his fists against his knees. "I can't just let them continue to." Kekyu cut Izuku off. "Will you defeat them? More will come. Humans do not know they are there. The small yokai only help humans do more hurt." Kekyu paused, unsure what words would convey his meaning. Izuku nodded. "You mean that even without the yokai, the bullying would continue? They just make it worse. Whether the yokai encourage the bullying or not, the bullies won't stop, still leaving scars, both visible and invisible. Bullying is bullying after all." Kekyu nodded. "Very smart." Izuku's eyes narrowed and he cut in quickly. "But I still want to do something. I still want to help in some way. Even if I can't stop the bullies, if I can make the bullying less bad, that's still something. I can't save the days like a hero yet, but I want to do something." Kekyu studied Izuku for a moment. "If you choose to fight, you must decide. Banish them from the human world. Send yokai away so they leave the school. Or you defeat them, and they return to nothingness." Silence fell, and the only sound was the flowing water of the river beside them. Izuku pondered his next move. Then he took a deep breath and nodded. "Kekyu, do you know any stories about how the Onmyoji banished and defeated yokai? I'll banish them if I can figure out how, and only defeat them if they are truly harmful. How can I make the yokai leave the school?" Kekyu nodded and, speaking slowly, said, "Onmyoji use talismans to fight and banish yokai, keep them out of houses. I know some. You need to find stories too. I saw talismans once. I think I remember what it looked like, but I do not know how to make them." Izuku grimaced, nodding in turn. He researched quirks and always worked to improve his quirk analysis. He had researched workouts with his mom and even continued to look up updated information. What was one more project? More than once, he had noticed a yokai near a villain fight and in rare cases, latched onto a villain. So, who knew? Knowing how to use talismans might come in handy when he became a hero. Just like bullies, regardless of yokai, there would always be villains. But if he could make it less bad, if he could lessen the severity of villains' attacks by also taking care of the yokai, he could do good. Excitement built in Izuku, and he began to bounce where he sat. Minimizing the yokai's effect could reduce some of the damage, even if only a little. Looking at Kekyu and Jinro, he thought about the two and how they might even encounter yokai stronger than them. There would probably even be other yokai who needed help too. Just like Jinro once needed help. Just like the ox and boar yokai, who had disappeared only to leave a small offering before returning to the mountains, if Kekyu's story about where they went was to be depended upon. Izuku could do this. Later that day, Izuku looked at the crudely drawn symbols on the paper Kekyu had given him. They looked more like squiggly lines than anything else. To start his search on yokai and on Myoji, he found and watched some reruns of old pre-quirk shows. The talismans in those looked much like the one he held in his hand. Most of the shows also generally involved some sort of monk and temple. Izuku wondered if one of the temples nearby would have similar talismans so he could compare them, but he was worried that their talismans might be less accurate due to people forgetting about yokai. All his conversations with Kekyu and Jinro about the relationship between yokai and humans centered around how humans and yokai no longer interacted, except in the cases where yokai instigated mischief. Izuku puzzled over the paper, and after a quick glance at his mom, who was cooking in the kitchen, he turned off the TV and slipped into the computer room and, turning on the device, did a quick search for temples in the area, looking for the oldest, the one with the most rooted history. After digging through several sites and cross-referencing everything, one very old temple with a very basic website stood out. There were a few talismans for sale on the website, which did not look promising. However, some of the old talismans in the pictures of the temple looked similar to the one Kekyu drew. Izuku also searched for talismans but found little, except for sham, good luck, papers. Most of it looked suspicious. Still, he compared all the talismans from the various temples and other websites to the one in his hand. After all, Kekyu did have first-hand experience. After a while, he decided that going to the temple was the best thing to do. Izuku glanced at the door behind him. Now, all he needed to do was convince his mother to take him. "Are you sure about this, Aizu?" Izuku hopped from one foot to the other as he glanced back and forth between his mom and the long flight of steps leading up to the temple. His bouncing grew more fervent at finally being able to see what the temple had to offer, and Inko merely smiled wanly. Izuku had been muttering about yokai for a while, and over the last few days, she knew he was looking into the nearby temples. He was still very focused on his training, and there were times he disappeared for a while before returning to the house exhausted. It was all very bizarre, but if it kept him occupied, it was good. Inko also knew Izuku's quirk analyses were also coming along nicely. She could only hope he would find the right path for his future. Inko looked at the long flight of steps worriedly, but Izuku was not worried. He had been training and knew the trek up the steps would be easy. Inko sighed, "Go on ahead. I'll be right behind you." Izuku beamed and quickly began the long climb. Izuku's jaw dropped as the first torii gate appeared, and he passed through it. Up and up he went, and finally he came to the last gate. He could see the temple beyond it, but as he passed through, he could feel a change in air. Izuku paused, everything felt clean and clear. Looking back, he saw his mom about halfway up the steps. He glanced back at the temple again and saw one of the monks. With one last look at his mom, he quickly darted forward, hoping to ask about yokai and talismans. After only a minute, it became apparent that talking to the monks would not help. "Child, yokai do not exist. The talismans you see were set up by the monks who established this temple." Izuku sighed, and the monk continued, "But you can see the appealing architecture and some of the original talismans by the offering box." Izuku smiled to hide his disappointment but bowed respectfully and then made his way to the offering box. "Might as well go through the motions," Izuku sighed. It was so strange. As he went through the torii gate, he was sure he had felt something familiar. It felt a bit like the refreshing feeling that washed over him when he meditated. As he approached the box, he noticed a young-looking male sitting behind it. No one seemed to take note of him, and while he was dressed similarly to the monks, he was also very different. Izuku squinted. I don't think yokai can enter the temples. Izuku looked around once more before cautiously approaching, eyes never wavering from the young man. A slight pressure on his shoulder, though, made Izuku jump. Izuku, what are you looking at? Izuku spun around to see his mom standing behind him. Oh, I was just going to see the offering, well, you know. Inko nodded. Shall we go together? Izuku beamed at her, and he turned to approach the box once more. As they did, the young man sitting by the offering box merely glanced in their direction lazily, but when his eyes fell on Izuku, he blinked. Izuku, who was still looking more at him than at the box, noticed right away. The young man only narrowed his eyes and then turned away indifferently. A group led by a monk passed by, and Izuku overheard the story the monk was telling them. They say a familiar still watches over the temple to this day. Izuku turned to observe the young man again as he and his mom stepped up to the box, wondering who he was, and hoping. Izuku feigned ignorance as he and his mother clapped their hands and held a moment of silence. How will I speak to him without anyone hearing? Izuku felt his heart pick up. If this young man was, in fact, a familiar, then he could help Izuku make talismans, and maybe he would join him and the others. Glancing around, Izuku saw the same monk from earlier, still regaling the visitors with a tale, and pointed him out to his mother. Inko glanced around and, seeing the monk Izuku had pointed out, touched Izuku's shoulder and whispered, "Do you want to listen?" Izuku shook his head. "In just a minute. I want to look more closely around the offering box. Would you listen and tell me what he says?" Inko nodded, and Izuku waited until he knew her attention was diverted. Then, he turned back to the young man and spoke, "I was wondering if I could ask a few questions, sir." The familiar glanced at him again and, seeing Izuku's eyes trained on him, raised an eyebrow. "I am a guardian of this place. Ask what you may, but I may decline to answer. I have the sight, and I've been able to see yokai for a long time. I've been training to protect myself." "Obviously." Izuku started, "How?" The familiar looked at him skeptically. "I can sense your spiritual energy. Can you not feel that of others? Given your current abilities, you should be able to feel at least some." "I can feel some at school when I focus." The familiar nodded. "Yes, it is easier to feel those who are weaker or who cannot hide it. If the gap is too big, you will not, unless you focus or they want you to feel it. Though you should be careful. If you grow without considering the consequences and without proper control, you will only invite trouble. Will you be willing to help train me? I'm looking to use talismans to help keep the yokai out of my school." The familiar studied him for a moment. "I will not leave this place. Let me see what you carry." Izuku showed it to the familiar, wide-eyed at the realization that the old familiar knew he had it. The familiar nodded. "It needs perfecting. You will find what you need by the entrance, at the bottom of the torii gate. Once they are done, place one at each corner of the school and grounds to make a perimeter. Go now, human, and be wary. Yokai will seek you out if you continue to grow your power. So carefully consider your path, and always protect yourself." Izuku started, "How do you know that Yoki will look for me? I can tell you have only recently started training. You would be advised not to pursue this path without much thought. Carefully consider your path. Heed my warning. If you need refuge, come. Now go." Izuku wanted to ask the familiar more but bowed respectfully and backed away. Then, he turned and darted toward the torii gate. As he approached, he felt that refreshing atmosphere grow stronger. At the bottom of the gate, he saw several talismans, each with the same design. His eyes widened as he recognized the patterns on the small slips of paper. Sitting by the foot of the gate, he quickly pulled out his notebook and began to copy the design as accurately as possible. Once he was done, he looked back toward the offering box but did not see the familiar anymore. Standing, Izuku grinned as he found his mother still listening to the monk. He had what he came for, so listening to a few more stories would not hurt. That night, Izuku sat at his desk, in his pajamas, and looked at the finalized talisman. He had taken the one Kekyu had given him and his notebook with the copy from the temple and created several talismans for the school. The familiar said to put one in each corner of the school and then each corner of the grounds. "So, I guess I should make I can put one at each of the 4 corners of the walls and the outside corners of the school. There are plenty of bushes, so I don't think people will see them, but what if the groundskeepers find them and take them down tenu? Izuku continued to mutter, considering as many possibilities as he was able. Izuku! Izuku jumped as his mother called out to him from the bedroom door. He turned quickly to see his mother smiling softly. Izuku felt his heart stop for a second. What if she heard? But then he smiled. He was sure his mother would worry, but she was his mom after all. She would always be there to help. It's time for bed, Izuku. It will be another big day at school tomorrow. Yes, Mom. Izuku stuffed the papers into his bag and hopped into his bed. Inko nodded and turning off the lights left, closing the door softly. She only glanced back once she was out of sight. While she still smiled, worry pinched her brow. Turning, she left to finish cleaning up the kitchen before she would turn in herself. The next day at school, Izuku could not stop fidgeting. It felt like the talismans were burning a hole in his bag. He had no idea when he would find time to place them in each corner of the school. But he did notice that the yokai seemed to skirt around him even more than usual, eyeing him and his bag suspiciously. It was not until recess that Izuku was able to slip away to place the first talisman. He cautiously made his way to one of the corners of the building, and kneeling behind a bush, he gently placed the talisman on the wall. Izuku took a deep breath. Okay, Kekyu said to infuse it with my energy. How do I do that? Is it the same as when I used my words to fight the yokai before? Placing his fingers on the talisman, Izuku concentrated and willed the energy flowing in him to pass into the paper. After a few failed attempts, he settled his mind enough and, feeling the flow of energy, grasped it. With a feeling like static running down his arm, he felt the energy flow into the paper. At that exact moment, a small yokai jumped, startling Izuku. Their eyes met, and the yokai glanced at the paper before shuddering and scurrying away, leaping over the wall and out of the grounds. Izuku stared after the yokai, nonplussed. Then, looked back at the talisman. It worked. Izuku jumped up and hurried to the second corner. With each new talisman, one at each of the 4 corners of the school and the 4 corners of the walls, it became easier and easier. As he laid the last of the 8 talismans, he felt his whole body vibrating with excitement. Before infusing it with energy, he took one last look around. Several meters away, he saw the tall, lanky yokai he had fought. It looked at him with horrified awe, anger flashing in its eyes. Izuku hesitated only a moment but, thinking about the damage the yokai could do, turned back to the talisman and infused it with energy. As soon as he did, he felt a surge of energy from the talisman, and simultaneously, another surge of energy rose up. Izuku spun around to see flocks of yokai flying and scampering out of the school, all heading for the walls and sky to flee the area designated by the talismans. Izuku watched in awe, suddenly feeling like he could breathe. As the yokai left, Izuku could feel the air in the school grounds become clearer. It was not as clear as the temple, but it was far better than it had been. The next day, there were no yokai in the school or on the grounds to harass him or the other students. And just as he hoped, the jibes and offhand comments from his classmates had noticeably lessened. Bakugo and Jiro still pestered him, but even those felt less threatening. Izuku could not help himself. So, after school, once everyone was gone, he checked all the talismans, touching each softly and willing more energy into them. He could feel the light crackle and tingling of energy following through them. If this is what he could do now when he just started, what more could he do? How much more could he grow? Now, he needed to figure out how to make it work when he was a hero. Izuku smiled and darted off, unaware of the consequences that would follow as the little yokai left their territory, the school, and flooded in the surrounding ones. Izuku stood in the middle of the living room, still as a statue. His 4th grade homework was scattered across the table, and even though the ceiling light was on, the room felt dark and oppressive. A large orange yokai cat sat crouched on top of the bookshelf while staring down at Izuku. Izuku eyed its tail nervously. The tail had a flame at its tip, and it was flicking one way and then the other while the flame flickered. The yokai cat's narrow, slitted eyes gleamed, reflecting the waning light from outside the window. They seemed to be trying to devour Izuku. Izuku tried to keep his breathing steady as he observed the yokai cat, taking in as much as possible, tense and prepared for the worst. Curiosity, though, also piqued his interest despite the sense of danger the yokai cat and its tail posed. Something sat on top of the yokai cat's head. It almost looked like horns, but not quite. Izuku could not make out what it was in the fading light. "So, it is you?" The yokai cat hummed, almost like a purr. The sound distracted Izuku from his observations, and a shiver ran up his spine. Its voice rumbled, deep and throaty, enchanting and possessive, and otherwise altogether betraying its sly and predatorial nature. The yokai cat's tail flicked again, the flames at its tip coming dangerously close to a cloth wall hanging, almost setting it alight. Izuku's eyes darted between that tail and the yokai cat's gaze. He nodded once but dared not speak. It was painfully obvious that this yokai was not at all like the average schoolyard yokai. It was not a mere bully or prankster. The sinister aura, which was growing ever thicker, now gave the room a cold, cloying feeling. It took all of Izuku's will to remain calm. As another shiver passed up his spine, Izuku found himself wishing Kekyu were willing to come home with him. If Kekyu were there, it could help him figure out what to do. Jinro might be able to help him wrestle it out of the home. It was painfully obvious that although he had been able to fight the lanky schoolyard yokai, Izuku would not be successful in any kind of altercation with this yokai on his own. He could feel the difference in their strength. Not to mention, the talismans he had set in the home had done nothing to keep it out, despite their continued success at the school. This yokai was clearly different. It was more like the yokai who lived in the heart of the city, yokai who feasted on annoyance, anxiety, and hostility, than the schoolyard yokai. Even then, it seemed keener and far more intelligent than any yokai Izuku had yet seen. Izuku could feel the malevolence of the yokai in front of him. As he grew older, spent time with Kekyu, trained with Jinro, and especially after placing the talismans at school, his ability to sense yokai grew. Izuku knew this yokai cat was very dangerous. The yokai cat crouched, and Izuku stiffened. "You are the human who can see us." The yokai cat purred again, drawing out the "see" with a low trill. "A few small yokai recently intruded upon my home. They talked of you." The yokai cat tilted its head, eyes never leaving Izuku's own. "I did not hear much," the cat paused. "After all, they were quite tasty and I didn't quite catch it all." The yokai cat licked its lips, and Izuku flinched. Still crouching, the yokai cat's eyes gleamed as it pushed its head forward, eyes growing wider. "Then, I remembered tales told by an old ox and boar a few years ago. They also talked of a small human who could see us." Izuku flinched again as its tail flicked, this time coming even closer to the wall hanging. The yokai cat tilted its head even more, and Izuku, skin crawling and the hair on his arms tingling, took a step back. Only one, because the moment he stepped back, the yokai cat stood like a human, pupils narrowing into thin slits, and a grin flicking across its features. "Oh!" It questioned and hopped down from its perch to the table, knocking over a picture frame as it went, the sly grin growing even wider across its face. "What is your name, little one?" Izuku shook his head. Kekyu had been very stern about Izuku not sharing his name with any yokai he came across. Telling a yokai your name was like giving it permission to use it, and use it they would, as a spell to control him. Izuku took a steadying breath and looked back at the yokai cat intently, attempting to convey his resolve to say nothing. He was not going to tell the yokai cat his name. So, he shook his head more emphatically. The yokai's eyes narrowed more, and it hissed, but when Izuku did not back away further, it merely raised what looked like an eyebrow, sniffed, and then hopped out the open window. Izuku let out the breath he had been holding. Movement in his peripheral made him jump, but it was only Inko, who came out of the short hall connecting the living room to the back of the small apartment where the bedrooms and bathroom were. She was drying her hair with a towel. Her eyes betrayed her worry. After all, Izuku had seemingly been talking to himself, yet again. "Izuku, are you okay?" Izuku nodded and, in a clipped tone, asked, "Can I go for a walk?" Inko's eyes skimmed the mess of paper on the table by the couch. "Is your homework done?" Izuku shook his head. "You need to finish your homework." Izuku grimaced. I just need a small break so I can focus. Please? I'll be right back. Inko took a moment to observe Izuku. Usually, he would not resist if she asked something of him. Izuku was pale and looked a bit sweaty. Inko took a step forward and reached to place her hand on his forehead. Are you coming down with something? Izuku took a step back, shaking his head. No, I just need a walk. Inko nodded slowly and looked outside. It's getting dark. Don't be out long. Come back before the sun is down. Izuku glanced out the window and then nodded. He would have just enough time to find Kekyu, ask his question, and then come back. If need be, he could ask Kekyu to come to his room, if they needed more time. The yokai cat terrified Izuku, and he needed to know how to deal with it if it ever came back. After Izuku explained the encounter to the hairy yokai, Kekyu nodded. The Gotoku Nico. Very forgetful but will keep the house warm if taken care of while still a cat, but if not, it will become hostile. They live in rural places where they can stay by the hearth. Very much like a cat to pop up and then disappear. What was that on its head? A trivet. Why? I do not know. But not all Bakeniko are bad. Some Gotoku Nico are good, but other Bakeniko like Maneki Nico are good fortune. Different Maneki Nico have different fortunes. What are they? I do not know all, but some bring wealth and fortune. Izuku pouted, and Kekyu had the decency to look a bit sheepish. I know many things about yokai, but only lots about the most common. Many yokai are not the larger type, but born from human emotion or due to being very old objects. Izuku tilted his head. Some yokai are born because things that humans care for last long time, like a nice cup that is lost or thrown away. After gaining power from Earth, cup yokai live under the house and warn people there if danger is near, running around. Izuku nodded. They had not talked much about the more random yokai, but he was more concerned about the Gotoku Nico. Do you think it heard my mom call my name? Kekyu shook its head. You remember lesson, no? Yes. So long as you do not tell it your name, you are fine. Over the years, Kekyu had given Izuku many long lectures about the importance of names and ranted about how much humans abused them. In the yokai world, it was the act of giving one's name that allowed another to use it. After the long diatribe and Kekyu's descriptions of the horrible things a yokai could do with one's name, Izuku did not want to learn the hard way. He appreciated their warnings and respect now more than ever. Izuku had also noticed that Kekyu almost never used his name, and it had been reassuring that Kekyu respected the name, so Izuku did the same in return. The feeling of knowing Kekyu had shared its name all those years ago, despite all the ways a name could be used, made Izuku happy. Kekyu, the fuzzball, and Jinro were the only yokai Izuku knew, and even now, only Kekyu knew Izuku's name. Jinro had told Izuku his but refused when Izuku offered his in response, much to Izuku's surprise, but not Kekyu's. Izuku and Kekyu sat in silence for a moment, but Izuku shook himself, and Kekyu turned to face him. Izuku gave a slight bow. Thank you for helping. I have to get back now, or Mom will be mad. Kekyu pouted, and Izuku giggled. I'll come tomorrow. Tomorrow I will tell you more about Onmyoji, what I saw them do to banish evil yokai. Maybe it will help if Gotoku Nico comes back, or another strong yokai. I do not know spells or how to cast them, but stories may help, like when you made talismans. Kekyu puffed his chest and nodded proudly. Izuku paused, nodded, and then slipped out of the clearing behind the bush and trotted back home. All the while, he kept his eyes trained on the path ahead of him. Yokai were starting to peek out of their daytime hiding spots as the shadows lengthened. Soon, it would not be entirely safe for him to be outside. Once back at the apartment, Izuku rushed up the last flight of steps and hurriedly slipped into the apartment, pressing his back against the door, eyes wandering to the now closed window. Izuku took a deep breath and let it out, moving further into the apartment and peeking into the kitchen where he could see his mother at the stove, humming to herself. I'm back. Inko turned. Welcome home, Izuku. Did you have a good walk? Izuku nodded. Well, dinner will be ready in just a bit. See if you can finish up a little bit more of your homework before then. Izuku made a face and Inko giggled. Yes, now go. Izuku smiled. glad for the sense of normality. Then he quietly surveyed the home, checking for another yokai intruder. When he found none, he stood by his scattered homework for a moment before glancing at his mother, then settled down to do more work. As soon as Izuku sat, and Inko could hear the sound of pen on paper, she glanced over her shoulder, worry etched on her face. She was more than certain she had heard voices from the living room before he left for his walk. She distinctly remembered hearing Izuku, but the other voice was indistinct. She could not even be certain she actually heard it. After Izuku insisted on going out for a walk, she had walked over to the window, surveyed the street below, and then firmly shut it. With a sigh, she decided to wait and see, tucking away her concerns for future contemplation. Over the next few weeks, Izuku considered the encounter and what he should do if the Gotoku Nico returned. But summer vacation was starting soon, and he had end-of-term tests to worry about. And so, Izuku walked home from yet another day of school. Today, his mother had asked him to stop by the market. Glancing around, he noticed that he was very close to the place where he first met Jinro. Izuku smiled at the memory. He shaded his eyes and stared up at the sky, wondering if this summer was going to be as hot as the summer when they met. Then, Izuku heard a cry of pain followed by the sound of small popping explosions from the nearby park. Izuku's heart wrenched, already guessing the circumstances. Quickening his pace, Izuku approached the park, and as he rounded the dome in the playground he saw one of the smaller students, whose quirk had manifested a little bit later than the others, lying on the ground. Above him, Bakugo and his friends stood glaring down at him. Bakugo's hands were giving off sparks. Izuku flinched, remembering the feeling of burns littering his skin after Bakugo had done the same to him. Behind Bakugo and his two friends, several small yokai flittered around, either hovering and flying around the three bullies' heads or scurrying around their feet. Go on. Give him another one. He's weak. Teach him his place. Don't worry about anyone seeing. He can't measure up to you. You're invincible. The yokai egged on the unhearing but very responsive bullies. The most disturbing yokai, however, was not just flitting around the bullies. This yokai, a yokai that looked like the disembodied head of a gray wolf, was pressed against the side of Bakugo's face, rubbing itself along his jawline. The wolf-head yokai was looking up at Bakugo pleadingly, like it was attempting a dewy puppy-dog-eye look, but the sinister glint shattered the cute doe-eyed feeling, and the malicious grin, lips curled back almost Joker-like, revealed razor-sharp teeth. The wolf-head yokai's words were the worst of them all. Its voice dripped with honey, almost like a keening whine, but the edge behind it sent shivers down Izuku's spine. Don't worry about the pebbles in your path. You are the best of them all. You are great. Only you can make it to the top anyway. The wolf-head yokai nuzzled Bakugo again, and Izuku's former friend looked down on their classmate with haughty eyes. You're at the top of the food chain. The best. Everything you do is right. So, always do what you want. Burn him. Crush him. Make him bleed. Blood is always the best color. Izuku pushed between Bakugo, desperately trying to avoid an inadvertent glance at the glaring wolf head. Izuku glared, Stop. You shouldn't use your quirks to hurt people. It's wrong. Everyone jumped, startled by the sudden intrusion, but Bakugo quickly recovered. The wolf-head yokai glaring daggers at Izuku all the while. Move it, Bakugo snarled, hands popping. It was then that Izuku noticed Bakugo's eyes were slightly glazed and unfocused. Izuku flinched back in surprise but froze when the wolf-head yokai's eyes gleamed and its grin widened in pleasure. Bakugo growled, What did I say, nerd? Bakugo looked down on Izuku, hands popping even more violently. Izuku's eyes widened more. He had never really overcome the human bullies, and the memories of how much those burns hurt made him tremble. Izuku bit the inside of his lip and steeled himself, eyes glued on Bakugo's own. The wolf-head yokai huffed and, sliding up to Bakugo once more, whispered in his ear. You don't need this. It looked at Izuku out of the corner of its eye. Deku. Izuku's jaw clenched. Bakugo growled, Move it, Deku. Burn him. Let him have it instead if he won't move. Make him move. Bakugo's hands flickered with sparks. Stop getting in my way. Move it or I'll make you, Deku. Izuku's eyes trembled as Bakugo continued to mirror the wolf-head yokai. This is what Bakugo was becoming in the face of his powerful quirk, the fawning and praise doled out by those around him, and the constant meddling of malicious yokai. A sudden memory leapt to the forefront of Izuku's mind. It was one of the more recent stories Kekyu told after the Gotoku Nico visited only a few months before. While Onmyoji used talismans, they also used their spiritual power to banish yokai. The memory slotted itself together with a training session with Jinro. Their martial lessons were not just for training the body but the spirit as well. It was meant to strengthen the body, mind, and spirit. He needed to use his spiritual energy directly, connecting it with the martial training. This is what he had done when he fought the schoolyard yokai before placing the talismans, but it had been at a much weaker scale. Now that he knew more about what the Onmyoji could do, and now that he was stronger, maybe he could figure it out. Now, Izuku wanted to try something new. So, he kept his eyes on Bakugo while watching the wolf-head yokai in his peripheral field of vision. Izuku performed the most basic fighting stance. Focusing on his core and digging deep with his breath, Izuku willed the energy flowing within him to focus into his fingers, much like he did when he imbued the talismans. Then, with a firm step forward, Izuku performed the move Kekyu described the Onmyoji using. Izuku struck his hand in a cutting gesture, his fore and middle fingers together like a knife, and calling out with conviction, "Begone." Izuku felt a sudden surge of power, and a weak light, invisible to humans but not to yokai, burst forth from his fingers, drawing a line on the ground between him and Bakugo. At that moment, the yokai swirling around the three bullies scattered. Only the wolf head remained in the vicinity, but it now hovered several meters away, staring non-pulsed at Izuku, whose focus remained on Bakugo. Bakugo's eyes cleared, his brows snapping together in annoyance. "You're not better than me, nerd. Don't tell me what to do." Bakugo clicked his tongue, hands popping with much smaller sparks. "Quit looking down on me." "I'm not looking down on you. You're going to be an awesome hero, but heroes don't hurt other people." Izuku imbued each word with as much conviction as he could, just like he did when he spoke to yokai. He stood up to them. Now, he needed to stand up to Bakugo. Bakugo's eyes twitched, and his face contorted. Then he surged forward and shoved Izuku with a sharp burst of his quirk. Izuku fell back a step, but his training kicked in, allowing him to catch himself before he fell. Izuku felt blood seeping from a cut on his forehead. At the sight of the blood, Bakugo froze, eyes wide, before clicking his tongue again. Spinning on his heels, Bakugo gestured to his two friends and stomped off. "Let's go." Bakugo only looked back once and slouched, with his hands digging into his pockets, before the three disappeared. Izuku tried to ignore the wolf head, and, turning, offered his hand to the boy on the ground. Small burn marks and a few bruises littered the boy's arms and legs, but the boy slapped Izuku's hand away. "Go away." Izuku halted. "Why did it have to be you?" The boy whined. Izuku backed up as the boy picked himself up. "Just leave me alone." Izuku watched as the boy left. He could feel the wolf-head yokai approaching, but it did not move too close. "See, it's no use, Deku." Izuku stiffened while the yokai grinned. His thoughts ran a mile a minute. "What should I do? It knows I can see it. The yokai who were in the school knew, but I didn't want any others." "No, that's optimistic. Otherwise, why would the Gotoku Nico have come? I think some of the yokai I displaced may have gone to its territory." Izuku shuddered and took a deep breath, controlling his expression. "Don't approach me or Bakugo again." The wolf yokai snickered. "Oh. And what will you do? An untrained one such as yourself?" That borderline was merely a fluke. Izuku perked when the yokai named the spell. Kekyu did not know what it was called, and even Izuku had been trying to put together pieces of information in a single moment to cast it. To know he had performed a real spell was surprising, but he could not let the yokai know. Izuku so desperately wanted to bluff, but doing so and failing would only be dangerous. So, Izuku turned sharply and walked away. The wolf head merely watched, grin fading to a frown, and solemnly glaring as it watched Izuku disappear down the road. Once out of sight, Izuku broke into a run, sprinting to the narrow forest path and to the bush under the tree, where he collapsed, breathing. A sudden wave of dizziness overtook him, and Izuku curled up on his side, trying to catch his breath. Kekyu popped up beside him, but upon seeing Izuku's condition, immediately began to fret. Izuku breathed, managed a borderline. That's what the yokai called it. Kekyu's eyes lit up, but the tension did not leave its face. You need to be careful. Do not use too much spirit energy at once. It will be easier from now on, but must have more control. Do not use too much too fast. Izuku's arms trembled as he tried to sit up. Kekyu had to help him so that Izuku could lean against the tree, and then Izuku briefly explained. Kekyu listened carefully, then nodding said, "You put much force behind it, maybe too much, but if the wolf head did not flee, then it was a strong yokai. Strong enough not to be banished. You need more control. Learn how to draw the right amount. Must be careful not to leave yourself vulnerable if you use too much." Izuku smiled, nodding. He could tell. He had felt the power build and release, and he could feel how much it drained him. Kekyu nodded once again, patting Izuku's shoulder. "Probably will not be able to use power for a while, but it will be back. Then you can work on building more. Strengthen it and banish even stronger yokai." Izuku gave Kekyu a half-hearted grin, and the hairy yokai cackled happily at the thought of Izuku's progress. Minutes before, and as soon as Izuku cast the borderline, a yokai with beady eyes in a lion-like face who had been hiding in a nearby waterway started at the sudden surge of spiritual power coming from above the water's surface. It had been waiting along the path for the small human, continuing its ever-increasing vigil of the boy with the sight. Today, it seemed, the small human confirmed its fears. The yokai had been watching the child with the sight for a long time now. The more the child learned, and the stronger its spiritual power became, the more the child was the center of attention in various circles. The little hairball yokai was a known associate. Even if the hairball yokai was not actively disliked, it was not well liked either. The little runt was small and easy prey to pick on. But now, it was standing tall as the first familiar of the new human with the sight. The beady-eyed yokai had first sent others to watch, but it was displeased with some of the most recent turns of events. The first was the influx of small yokai cast out of the school. Those that had settled nearby had been a nuisance to dispose of. The next was the brief invasion of the Gotoku Nico, who had passed through the beady-eyed yokai's territory. The arrogant cat yokai had ignored it in favor of satiating its curiosity concerning the child. The beady-eyed yokai did not like being ignored. It dealt with that enough from its own kind. It did not want vagrant yokai banished from little human schools and wandering yokai from the country invading and trespassing on its territory. Most of all, it did not need some small human child growing powers that should have been dormant or lost entirely to mere humans. The child had already defeated a yokai in a fight and had even created protective talismans, the reason for its first issue with the human. The talismans were not perfect, enough to chase out the little yokai and keep its subordinates out, but not enough to keep it out, the very reason it had started its personal vigil. Now, the child had done it again. This sudden new growth spurt of power indicated that the child had stepped over a threshold that the yokai did not like. If it wanted to maintain its place, the beady-eyed yokai with a lion-like face would have to take action. It needed a plan. The gore warning? It's gory for me, others might not think it is though. This is one of the chapters that led to the T rating. If need be, review the tags from the first chapter. MHA and its characters, whether in written or visual formats, belonged to Kohei Horikoshi. The yokai, which somewhat resembled a kappa, stood a bit shorter than Izuku. It lacked the beak-like face and the bowl on its head, but rather, it was scaly and had beady eyes in a lion-like face despite clearly being a water yokai. Izuku shuddered at its scaly skin, but it was the yokai's knees that drew Izuku's attention. They looked like they had furry claws on them. The strange yokai did nothing but stare, and Izuku felt the urge to turn around, to go back the way he had come, but they had made eye contact. Turning away now would be like running away, and Izuku knew running away would only provoke an attack. The yokai growled in a deep croak-like voice. Izuku started and frowned. At Izuku's silence, the yokai continued, "You can see. It has been long since the last Onmyoji tread this land. He curbed us, stopped us, hunted us. And you took what was mine. You banished yokai with talismans. You caused them to invade my river, my banks. Silence fell as the yokai with the lion-like face seethed, eyes distorted in rage. Izuku shifted and, taking a deep breath while eyeing the yokai cautiously, countered, I will stop yokai from hurting humans. Even if the urge to run still tugged at the corner of Izuku's mind, lately he felt emboldened. This yokai's aura was sinister, but not nearly as oppressive as the Gotoku Nico. Ever since the encounter with the wolfhead yokai, he was feeling much stronger, and as the story spread, the little yokai in the neighborhood had started to avoid him, resulting in even fewer threats from the bullies without the yokai to provoke them. Bakugo and the other bullies were still hard to deal with, but the confidence from his successful confrontations with yokai felt good. So, Izuku readied himself in case the yokai attacked, but its next words caught Izuku off guard. You used it? Izuku tilted his head, confused. Noticing this, the yokai shrieked, its dark and hostile aura seeping into the surrounding area. You used it. You used the borderline. You will only disrupt yokai more. At the sudden surge of malevolence, Izuku's veins began to tingle with fear and adrenaline. He faltered, his guard dropping. The force with which the yokai spoke had almost pushed him back a step, and Izuku had to fix his balance. As Izuku adjusted his guard, again preparing himself for an attack, the agitated yokai's glare intensified, eyes bulging at Izuku's defensive but assertive stance. It hissed, You will continue. You will not stop. Izuku cut it off. I will if... No, it screeched. Then, the yokai lunged, and Izuku shifted to deflect the blow just like Jinro taught him. But he never got the chance to use the techniques he trained so hard to master because, at that moment, a blur of green blocked the path of the lunging yokai. Izuku felt his blood run cold. All he could do was watch in horror as his mother dashed in between him and the yokai. A scream of pain filled the air, echoing in Izuku's ears, and splashes of red filled his vision. The force with which the yokai hit Inko pushed them into Izuku, knocking him away. His head hit the ground, bouncing off the pavement, before he rolled away across the ground and lay dazed, unable to move as his ears rang from the blow. Inko Midoriya could not see yokai, but Izuku had been acting strangely for quite some time. While children could hide things from their parents, and there were things parents did not know, it is a simple truth that parents notice far more than their children think. Inko Midoriya had often found Izuku staring into space and talking to himself, except he would pause and respond as if conversing with some unseen person. She remembered the first time he had done something strange. He had been so adamant and genuinely concerned about a turtle in the middle of the sidewalk, only to turn around and say it crawled off. It stood out in her mind because Izuku was not a good liar. Then, when he left with a water bottle later that day, she had not thought much of it. That is, until a friend said she saw him near the market, pouring water from a water bottle onto the sidewalk. And then there were the fish. Ever since that day, a fish showed up on their doormat every day. Even this morning, the fish was there. While tales of yokai were told less and less frequently, she was aware of the most well-known tales. Izuku's exclamation about Kappa in response to the fish initially had her assuming he had a new pastime. She was grateful at first. Given his lack of quirk, she felt he needed a distraction, but as time passed, coincidences and occurrences piled up. Eventually, she was sure that Izuku really believed he could see yokai. She had even found talismans hidden about the apartment when cleaning. Today was the day she was contemplating addressing the issue with Izuku. But then she saw it too. And Izuku was in danger. So, she did the only thing she could think to do, protect Izuku from the attacking yokai. Pain ripped through her as she felt sharp claws grip her and teeth sink into the nape of her neck, tearing away at her. Yet, almost as soon as she hit the ground, the weight of the attacking yokai disappeared. As her vision faded, she saw a small furry creature and a Kappa struggling with the attacker. She smiled. If they were the ones her dear little Izuku muttered about, then maybe everything would be all right. Maybe he would be safe. He was out earlier than usual for patrol. The sun still hung above the horizon and would not set for at least another hour, but today he needed a distraction. His students had been interesting, and he was seriously considering expelling the rebellious duo. Eraserhead sighed, straining his ears for sounds of trouble. Moving from rooftop to rooftop, he made his way toward one of the residential areas. A sudden scream of pain sliced through the air. Pivoting on his heel, Eraser flung out his capture weapon to rescue another citizen. Unfortunately, as soon as his feet left the ground, the scream cut short. His skin prickled with dread as he muttered a curse. It was never a good sign when a scream stopped so suddenly. There was no mistaking the scenario he was likely to come across. As the scene of the crime came into view, he saw two people lying on the ground. Both had green hair. One looked to be an adult woman, and the other was a child of about 9 or 10 years old. Eraser paused for only a moment to assess the scene in an attempt to determine where the attacker was. The child was crawling, scratching, and scraping at the ground, trying to reach the woman who lay in a slowly growing puddle of blood. While the boy appeared to be trying to crawl toward her, he was actually being dragged away by his leg by someone or something unseen. Eraser silently cursed. Even if it was not a mutant-type quirk, if he could not see the person, he could not erase the quirk, and if they could make objects invisible, then he could not be sure exactly where the villain was. Regardless, he did not have much time as the boy was given a sudden JRK and was dragged back even further. Without hesitation, Eraser jumped from the building. As he descended, he could see where whatever was wrapped around the boy's leg was cutting into his skin. The moment Eraser landed, the boy jerked his leg and suddenly started scrabbling forward. Eraser scanned the area again, but he still saw nothing. So, he cautiously moved toward the boy and his mother. Whether he could see the attacker or not, he needed to be in a position to protect them. Only seconds before, Jinro and Kekyu had pushed the yokai away from Izuku. As soon as the yokai's grip loosened, Izuku jerked his leg free of its grasp and began to crawl toward his mother. Izuku could feel the grit on the ground digging into his hands and knees, but he did not care. While his attention was on his mother, movement in Izuku's peripheral vision caught his eye, and he would have sighed in relief at the sight of a hero if not for the sheer terror engulfing him. Still, Izuku had just enough presence of mind to remember that the hero could neither see nor touch the yokai, meaning he could not do anything to stop it. With a quick glance back, Izuku confirmed that Jinro and Kekyu were stalling the yokai. He would have to trust them to take care of the yokai. As for his mother, he would have to trust the hero. His head whipped back to see that the hero was about halfway to his mother, and he desperately wanted the hero to focus on his mother. So, hoping the hero would believe him, he called out, "It's gone." At Izuku's call, Eraser nodded, but kept his guard up as he moved closer, drawing his phone out of his pocket and hitting the speed dial for an ambulance. Izuku finally reached his mother, eyes locked on her face, flaccid and pale. Hands and arms shaking, he picked himself up from the ground and knelt by her head, not daring to touch her. His head throbbed, and for a moment he felt the world spin. Eraser, who had fished his call, knelt next to Izuku and, telegraphing each of his movements, placed a reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. "I'm here to help." "Where did the villain go?" Izuku trembled. He could not focus and had no idea what he should tell the hero. "I was invisible, but I just saw it run as it let go." Eraser pursed his lips and scanned the area again, but the bleeding victim in front of him had to take priority for the moment. Straining his ears for any sound of approaching footsteps, Eraser shifted his attention to Inko. "All right, I'm going to check her over." "She's your mom, right?" Eraser kept his voice as level as possible, and wide, green eyes met his. Izuku nodded, his eyes then slowly flicking over the underground hero's uniform, reassured by the man's presence. As Eraser began checking over Inko, Izuku sniffled and asked, "You're Eraserhead, right?" Eraser's lips drew into a tight grimace at the warble in Izuku's voice, but he continued focusing on Inko. There was a lot of blood, and it was making it hard to find the source of the bleeding. Still, Eraser attempted to calm the unnaturally still child. "I've called an ambulance, and they will be here soon." Eraser knew he could not promise anything more, and Izuku nodded. When Eraser finally realized what he was looking at, he almost recoiled. What he had thought was blood surrounding the wound turned out to be the wound itself. Despite all his years as a hero, he had never seen anything quite like it. A large gouge spanning from the nape of Inko's neck and across her shoulder was obviously made by a set of razor-sharp teeth biting and tearing away at her. While it was shallow and was just shallow enough to miss the jugular, the sheer size meant she was losing blood rapidly. The pool of blood beneath her was slowly spreading. Blood also oozed speedily from deep, claw-like puncture wounds on her shoulder and the side of her face where her attacker had obviously gripped her to make the bite. Eraser pressed tightly to the wound at her neck with both hands, hoping the ambulance would arrive quickly as blood seeped between his fingers. He clenched his jaw. The wound was too big, and he did not want Izuku to read his tension. Izuku took his eyes off his mother as Eraserhead tried to stop the bleeding. Off to their right, Jinro and Kekyu still stood between the three humans and the other yokai, who now glared menacingly at Jinro. Izuku shuddered. Despite the danger, he was glad that Eraserhead had believed him. He needed the eraser to save his mom. Izuku watched as the yokai stared at him from the other side of his two friends. The yokai's eyes traveled over Izuku, to the hero, and finally, upward to something beyond them. Finally, it gave one last scornful look to Izuku and Jinro before tsuking and walking away, leaving Jinro and Kekyu to turn to face the scene behind them. As they took in the sight of Izuku and his mother, Jinro ummed. Images of Sukodano ordering Jinro and the other Kappa around flashed through his mind. Sukodano should not have cared about such a minor Kappa as Jinro. The Kappa at the bottom, and he had thought that he had hidden himself from Sukodano well. But the child had drawn Sukodano's attention by learning to use his spiritual energy and by building his mind and body. Jinro ummed again, believing wholeheartedly that this was his fault. If he had done a better job teaching the child, this never would have happened. If only it had not done anything. If only it had done more. Suko were stronger than Kappa. While they were a much more powerful yokai, Jinro could not have imagined this. Kekyu watched, eyes fixed on Izuku, who knelt by his mother, shocked and still dazed from the blow to his head. After that moment of hesitation, they approached, Jinro wailing, and Kekyu silent and somber. As seconds ticked by, Eraser put more pressure on the wound. The distant sound of a siren was welcoming, but still too far away. The pressure roused Inko, and her eyes shifted to the general vicinity of the man leaning over her. Inko's vision was fuzzy, and it was growing increasingly hard to breathe. Am I son, Izuku? Eraser felt the warbled vibrations of her vocal cords run under his hands and the way the blood pulsed through the wound as soon as she spoke. Rather than argue with her, Eraser glanced back up at the boy beside him, who was now swaying slightly as he tried to stay focused on his bleeding mother, eyes wide and unfocused. Izuku was muttering, but Eraser did not know what he was saying. It almost sounded like he was having a conversation. Izuku, for his part, was trying to keep his voice down. What was it? Izuku whispered. Jinro ummed, Sukodano. Kekyu turned sharply to face Jinro. What? Tsukio. Jinro ummed again. Kekyu pursed its lips. Izuku glanced at them but quickly turned his attention back to watch as Eraserhead tried to save Inko. You know it? Kekyu asked. Jinro nodded, clutching its head and shaking it mournfully. Clan left. It's not your fault, Jinro. Jinro sniffed. You chased it away, thank you both. Izuku had seen it. He had seen the moment Jinro had not been able to stand up against the more powerful yokai. Only seconds after the pair had pushed the Suko off of Inko, it had regained its balance and attacked again. Kekyu, who was no fighter, had been thrown to the side, and Jinro had not lasted much longer. As Izuku started to crawl toward his mother in desperation, the Suko had clawed and kicked at Izuku before grabbing him by the heel and starting to drag him away. It had felt like an eternity, trying to free his leg and get to his mother. It did not take long for Kekyu and Jinro to recover and push the Suko off Izuku, but the damage had been done. Now, Izuku was trying to quietly reassure a pitifully anguished Jinro and an indignant Kekyu. His eyes wandered to his mother, and he wondered how she had known, but also wished she had never been there to take the blow. Izuku felt a shiver pass up his spine, and the world tilted for a moment, but he shook his head to dispel the dizzy feeling. The blaring of sirens and screeching tires announced the arrival of the ambulance and 2 police cars. As soon as the vehicles came to a halt, the medics jumped out of the ambulance and rushed toward them. Eraser sighed in relief, but then felt a tug on his arm and, turning back, met the mother's gaze. She repeated her question, gasping as she tried to talk around the pain. Eraser nodded, ensuring her attention was on him. Izuku is fine. The medics are here and they'll take care of you. Inko, delirious and breathing shallowly, tightened her grip on the edge of Eraser's sleeve as the medics swarmed them, gently pulling Izuku away. Inko wanted to stop Eraser from leaving before the medics took her away. She had one last thing to say. Inko coughed, forcing the words past her lips. "I'm all he has. Please. Take care of." Tears were dribbling from the corners of Inko's eyes as they fluttered. Eraser glanced at Izuku, who sat completely still as a medic began checking him over. "Please," Inko whispered. Eraser knew she needed to let go. The medics were already working to stem the flow of blood, and one was trying to gently disengage her hand from Eraser's sleeve. Eraser could hear them, telling him to back away. They needed to take her and go. Eraser had seen the wound, he knew. The longer they lingered, the less likely she was going to make it, but it was a hero's job to console and reassure the victims. So, he did something he usually would not do. Eraser reassured her, "I'll keep an eye on him. I promise." Inko smiled, her grip weakening, and Eraser gently pulled back, the medics moving in to take his place. As the medics wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance, they moved in a flurry of practiced activity, putting pressure on her wound. All the while, Inko never took her gaze off of Eraser, doing her best to keep him in her sight, even as she was wheeled away. Eraser felt his gut twist uncomfortably. Inko watched and hoped that everything would be fine as the scene above sucked from the pale blue sky to the inside of the ambulance. Then, everything faded to black once more. As soon as the rear doors closed, the ambulance was moving again. So, Eraser turned his attention back to Izuku. A police officer was helping him into a police car, and another officer approached Eraser. "We'll take the kid to the hospital. He has a few scrapes and bruises, but the most concerning is the bump on the back of his head. He might have a concussion. So, the medics want to make sure everything is okay. We'll also look into whether he has any other guardians besides his mother. Cammy, I hope she wasn't single. This isn't looking good." Eraser tore his eyes away from the boy in the back seat, the officer's words pulling him out of his thoughts. The mother's plea for him to take care of her son echoed in his ears. He also hoped they could find the boy's other guardian. The officer continued in a clipped tone, "Can you tell me what happened here?" Eraser nodded and began his report. After the quick chat with the police officer, Eraser surveyed the scene, his gut twisting. Then, Eraser's phone buzzed. And the radio in the police car squawked frantically. Both men quickly turned their attention to the notices and information streaming through their devices. A group of criminals being transported in South Mizudafu had escaped custody. Heroes and officers were being called to help round them up. Eraserhead cursed under his breath. The officer spun on his heel and called out, "We'll take the kid to the hospital where they took his mother and then join in the manhunt." Eraser nodded and silently made a promise to himself to check in on the woman and her child once he had a chance. He snapped his capture weapon out and vaulted himself onto the roof of a nearby building, passing a dark, crouched and unseen figure as he went. Slitted pupils flicked between Eraser and the police car holding the little human, before the shadow jumped away to follow the Eraser hero. It had been watching the entire time, and while it had only met the eyes of the Suko for a moment, it was sure that the Suko would not return soon. It decided to find the little human later. For now, though, it continued to follow its human, who definitely needed more sleep and real food, and most definitely needed to destroy the yellow sleeping bag, which was atrocious to the eye. Eyes still closed, Inko roused enough to feel hands everywhere as the medics hooked her up to machines in the ambulance and tried to staunch the bleeding. She vaguely heard someone call for the driver to hurry. The last thing she felt was the ambulance picking up speed. The medics were in a flurry, and by the time they reached the hospital, They had brought Inko back from the brink twice. As they rushed her through the hospital, nurses converged on them, calling out instructions as they went. The doctor, who had been called in advance, took over with a grim face as they swarmed Inko and took her into surgery. Hours later, Inko Midoriya was in the ICU. They had stemmed the blood flow, but despite all their efforts, she had gone into hypovolemic shock and was comatose. The doctor sighed, rubbing her eyes, and turned to a nurse. "You said that her son was brought in too?" The nurse nodded. "Yes, he had minor scrapes and bruises. We were concerned that he might have a concussion, but he's fine. We still want to monitor him, though, just in case there are any issues we haven't found. He should be all right physically." The doctor nodded. "Did we find any information on an emergency contact?" "A family friend is listed." "No partner." The nurse shook their head. "Apparently, they are out of the country." The doctor sighed again. "Call the emergency contact. We'll wait for the family friend to explain the situation to the kid, but have a hospital counselor on standby if needed." The doctor looked at the proffered record for the child, wincing at the quirk diagnosis, and "Call child services, just in case." The nurse nodded and hurried off to do as they were told, glancing at Izuku's file only briefly. After making the calls, they slipped the file into its proper place. The nurse had rounds to make for several other patients. Izuku lay in the hospital bed, mind whirling. He had been checked over hours ago and told that his mother was in surgery. A nurse had checked in on him periodically, but otherwise he was left to alone rest. But sleep was far from Izuku. As Izuku tried to process everything that was happening, a rustling sound came from outside the window. Izuku stiffened, that is, until he saw the form of a cat batting its paw against the pane of glass separating it from the inside. Izuku smiled at the cat's antics but flinched when the cat used its tail to open the window and jump through to the inside. The yokai cat purred and hopped onto the edge of the bed. "Good evening, little human." Izuku felt himself relax at the less sinister-sounding purr. The Gotoku Nico had been far more intimidating. If he remembered Kekyu's descriptions of the various Bakeniko correctly, this was a Maneki Nico. Izuku smiled. While Kekyu had not known all the different types of Maneki Nico, Izuku had done some research. This Maneki Nico was black, and the silver stripe of fur around its neck, almost looking like a collar, glinted in the sun. He would not have to worry about evil spirits lurking around while this Bakeniko was in the room, if the research he had done was accurate. "Good evening." Izuku nodded his head. The Maneki Nico nodded back. "Good evening, little one. I have brought a companion to help you." Izuku's lip twitched at the directness of the statement, but he took a deep breath while he decided whether to accept the offer or not. If he accepted, he would be obligated to return the favor. If he refused, he could insult it. Yokai's whims could be hard to deal with. As if guessing his dilemma, the Maneki Nico purred, "My human wants to help you, but cannot do so currently. My companion and I have been watching him for a long time. As you are one who is in between our two worlds, one of the first in a long, long time, we have decided to give you a gift." "And in return, Maneki Nico-san?" The Maneki Nico titled its head aloofly, "Nothing. We merely longing to fulfill the wish of our human and meet the new one who walks between both worlds." "You really don't want anything from me?" "No. However, if you ever have the chance to help our human, that would be acceptable." Izuku considered the yokai cat for a moment, and taking in its appearance, asked, "You mean the eraser hero?" The Maneki Nico nodded, "Yes. Our human." Izuku's eyes widened, hopeful. "Does he know?" The Maneki Nico sat, curling its tail around its feet and huffed. "Of course not. To him, we are but mere stray cats who appear near his apartment when we wish to be seen." Izuku felt his heart drop, but he still smiled. The yokai cat licked its paw and brushed its ear, looking expectantly at Izuku. "Thank you," Izuku whispered, wondering how many people's cats were actually Bakeniko with the appearance of regular cats. At his words, the Maneki Nico turned, and another yokai cat hopped in through the window. This one, much smaller than the other, was reddish in color. The smaller Maneki Nico also leapt onto the bed, but came close and curled up by Izuku's side. The larger one nodded, "I will remain outside to ensure no malevolent spirits enter this place." My companion will help ensure your health improves quickly. Izuku nodded, and for the first time since coming to the hospital, drifted off to sleep. Both Bakuniko were gone when he woke, and he was feeling much better, at least until a moment later. Hushed but agitated whispers floated in through the door, which was now open. Sure, I watched him on occasion in the past when Inko-san needed help since Hisashi-san is away, but I can't take him in. I have my own family. I didn't even realize I was still her contact. It's been ages since we talked. Another voice cut off the first. We can't get a hold of the father. Of course not. He's working. You'll need to find him and get him to take the kid. I have things to do. Izuku blinked and saw Auntie Tanaka pass by the door. She glanced his way once, but when their eyes met, she turned her head away, face pinched, and strode out of sight. Izuku felt his heart seize, but she was gone, leaving a gaping and confused Izuku in her wake. Only a moment later, a serious-looking woman with a doctor's badge and another woman in a pencil skirt and matching blazer walked into the room. Izuku felt the tears coming even before they began to speak. There had been so much blood. He knew. And so, 2 weeks to the day after his 10th birthday, Inko Midoriya passed, and Izuku became a ward of the state.